Chapter 103. A bright and sorrowful violin tune slowly began to play, and when the tune ended, the movement of the two beams of light would stop. When the principal had said that the mysterious guest's surname was Tai, Sulu could not believe his ears. His lips parted slightly in shock, and he immediately guessed the true identity of the person on the second floor. Tai Ziyuan, this poor rich kid who had never even eaten a deep-fried dough cake before, was the main character of today's Double Moon Festival dance party. Sulu took in a deep breath, suppressing the shock in his heart. Last night, he had wanted to ask Tai Ziyuan if he wanted to attend the dance party with him today. Who would have thought that the other had already arrived, and was even preparing to pick his dance partner like a monarch looking down from above. The beautiful twin moons spilled clear light over the night sky, and the beams of light in the room moved slowly. As long as the beams shone on the girls, they would find it hard to suppress the nervousness on their faces. Right then, the principal's dampening voice rang out once again, mixing in with the beautiful violin tune. With a smile, he pointed out the true identity of the Black Mecca who had brought glory to Pear Blossom University this morning. Sulu listened, somewhat confused. He thought to himself, it was clearly him in Mecca, so how did it become Tai Ziyuan? However, he also knew that in this school, the only people who could enter District H1 were probably himself and Tai Ziyuan. If the other was willing to help him hide the truth, he would of course be very happy. This news once again caused a commotion on the dark dance floor. Those girls who had still been somewhat reserved, deliberately avoiding the beams of light, now showed expressions of joy. A young male student with an astounding family background, and a legendary character who could make an ace pilot of an entire academy return in defeat. How could they not be moved? The beams of light continued to move slowly. Those naive female students were filled with excitement and longing, praying that the beams of light would land on them. Meanwhile, those who knew Tai Ziyuan's true identity were abnormally excited. The only one who was not interested in this matter was probably Sulu. Although he was very surprised that Tai Ziyuan's family was more terrifying than he had imagined. What did this have to do with him? In his eyes, the scene in front of him was like an emperor choosing a concubine. In his opinion, this was a great disrespect to women. Even he was a little dissatisfied with the weak rich man who ate supper and went to the brothel with him. The scene was extremely quiet as countless pairs of eyes followed the two beams of light. The male students looked at this scene with envy and slight displeasure, while the female students looked at this scene with reservedness and longing. With the moonlight shining down, it wasn't completely dark. They could faintly see that in the most empty corner of the building, those rich kids who came from afar had tacitly divided into rows, with the girls standing in the front row. Right in the middle was Zhou, dressed in a red dress. However, the light was dim, so it was impossible to see whether her expression at this moment was calm or something else. She closed her eyes slightly, calmed her breathing, and waited for that moment to come. Many years ago, after she met Tai Ziyuan, her parents, brothers, and the people around her seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally made her feel that in this life, she could only be together with that young man who she had not seen for the past 2 years. However, at this moment that concerned her happiness in life, a detestable and roguish beautiful face suddenly appeared in her tightly shut eyes. The owner of that beautiful face had an incomparably evil heart, and her heart twitched slightly. Zhang Xiaoming, who was standing beside Zhou, was wearing a little blue dress that was originally not very eye-catching. However, in this gradually darkening environment, the material of the dress began to glow faintly. It was very eye-catching, like a pure little elf that had suddenly appeared in the forest. Who knew how many gazes she had attracted? She lowered her head slightly, and her fists that were naturally hanging by her side subconsciously clenched tightly. She was very nervous. Yes, she had someone she liked. She didn't know what that mysterious crown prince was, but she had to help Senator Macklin build a relationship with him, even if it meant sacrificing her own love and life. According to the recent reports, the federal military's hawkish faction had begun to speed up the pace of their preparations for war, and the senators lobbying in the capital had not been very effective. For the sake of those amiable and respectable companions and people in the 4 mountain estates, she had to do something. She clenched her fists tightly, controlling her impulse to turn around and leave or to look for Su Lu in the dark. She didn't know why Senator Macklin trusted her so much. No matter how she looked at it, that crown prince on the 2nd floor shouldn't have chosen her, right? Zhang Xiaoming comforted herself in her heart. Beside them, the girls who had come from afar were also very nervous. Under the sweeping lights, they displayed their slight shyness as they waited. They knew a lot more than the normal girls present, and they knew that the young man on the 2nd floor with the surname C wasn't just the successor of the Xiao Shu Foundation. Although the Xiao Shu Foundation was indeed one of the top private foundations in the Federation, in the face of the Tai family's wealth and power, perhaps it was just a smokescreen that could be casually discarded. In a room shaded by greenery on the 2nd floor, Tai Zhuan, who was holding a cup of coffee, watched the girls' reactions through the holographic screen with a bored expression. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "It's already the 37th constitutional calendar, and the Federation still has this kind of concubine selection activity. It's really shameful." He didn't have the self-awareness of being the person involved at all, and he expressed his emotions at the scene before him. Beside him, Butler Jean said disapprovingly, "This is a family tradition, and young master should know that there has never been anything involuntary during a coming-of-age ceremony." Tai Ziyuan smiled. When he thought about how the principal had used the words "the product of love" to introduce him, he felt a little strange. He saw Zhou Yu's face on the holographic screen, and his heart sank slightly. He asked, "Yuzi seems to be in a bad mood today. Did she find out something?" "No." Tai Ziyuan nodded. He was just expressing concern for his friends out of habit. Since Butler Jean said that there was no problem, then there naturally wasn't a problem. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a girl wearing a blue dress. In the darkness, standing beside the red-clothed Zhou Yu, the blue dress was so pure that it instantly made his eyes relax, and he began to feel pity for the girl. Delicate and moving, Tai Ziyuan stared blankly at the girl. After a long silence, he said softly, "It seems that this girl didn't want to come at all, but now she's standing stubbornly by Yuzi's side. This kind of proud and stubborn temperament, I keep feeling that it's somewhat familiar. I like it very much." Butler Jean calmly reminded him, "Zhang Xiaoming returned from S2 a year ago and once did voluntary clerical work in Senator Macklin's office. Although the Federation Investigation Bureau has already determined that she is a returnee and no longer monitoring her, I don't think she's a suitable candidate." "You're wrong. If I like a girl, even if she's from the Empire, I won't mind." Tai Ziyuan coughed softly. He looked at the girl in blue on the holographic screen. Although she appeared calm, her tightly clenched hands had already revealed her nervousness and resistance. A trace of gentleness and complexity flashed across his eyes. He said softly, "It's a pity that I met her a little too late." The violin song was coming to an end. Although Su Lu didn't have any musical knowledge, he could still hear the music. He looked at the movement of the beam of light somewhat indifferently. At this time, the beam of light had already politely swept around the hall. It came to the front of the group of rich girls, and the expressions of those girls became even more nervous. Only Zhou Yu and Zhang Xiaoming remained calm. Zhou Yu believed that no one in the hall could compete with her, because Lady Tai liked her very much. Zhang Xiaoming's feelings were so complicated that she forgot to be nervous. Everyone watched the movement of the beam of light nervously. Su Lu, who had been silent all this time, suddenly felt his heart beat faster. Thump, 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 thump. He suddenly had a very bad feeling. He had a feeling that Zhang Xiaoming had come to this ball just to wait for this moment, and that those 2 beams of light were going to fall on her. With his heart beating like a drum, Su Lu finally understood that his heart couldn't let go of this blue and pink girl who wore devil horns, asterisk, 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 and was sometimes like ice and sometimes like fire. He couldn't accept her being someone else's dance partner at the ball. Just as the violin song was about to end, Su Lu suddenly walked out from the corner and strode in Zhang Xiaoming's direction. However, After taking only 3 steps, Su Li's face was illuminated by a strong beam of light. He subconsciously narrowed his eyes and cursed in his heart. He was very worried that Zhang Xiaoming, that muddle-headed woman, would really become the dance partner of that sickly Meng Ji Yuan for something that he didn't know about. After a moment, his vision immediately returned to normal. He narrowed his eyes and looked around, but he realized that he could only see darkness. He could only hear extremely shocked cries. This was because he was currently enveloped by the beam of light. Sula looked around in a daze. He lowered his head and glanced at the expensive Jiyu gown he was wearing. It was shining like the moon under the silver light. For a moment, he didn't know where he was or what had happened. However, the surrounding exclamations and discussions had already exploded like an explosion, mixed with occasional exclamations of disbelief. Yes, no one would have thought that at the end of such a fairy tale-like scene, the object that the beam of light shrouded was actually a boy. After being shocked, the crowd was in an uproar. Those rich ladies who originally thought that they had high hopes couldn't believe their eyes. A counselor's daughter even fainted from sadness. The lady from the Sun family covered her mouth and looked at the perplexed male student in the middle of the field enveloped by the beam of light. She stuttered, "Could it be that the crown prince is gay?" Chapter 104. The Federation did not discriminate against homosexuals. In fact, there were already some states in the S3 region that had begun to push for homosexual marriage laws. If the Federation's oldest and most mysterious Thai clan, which had only been passed down for 7 generations, suddenly had a successor with homosexual tendencies, the Federation's president and the other big clans would be so happy that they wouldn't be able to sleep for a few nights. However, other than people like Miss Sun who were so shocked that their thoughts were in a mess, no one would think that the heir of the Thai family was really a homosexual. All the shocked and puzzled gazes were cast on Su Lu under the light beam. The exclamations could not be calmed down for a long time. The more people who knew the truth of the ball, the more incredulous they felt. Especially the group of men and women who had come from afar to attend the ball. They could not accept this fact at all. They subconsciously thought that there must be a problem with the lighting control of the central computer. However, the light beam did not move. Su Li's ordinary face was bathed in the silver light, adding a bit of charm to it. Even his puzzled frown looked very attractive. Zhou quietly stared straight at Su Lu in the center of the field. She thought that she was the only one present who knew that Tai Ziyuan and Su Lu knew each other. However, looking at this scene, she knew that although her brother crown prince could not be a homosexual, in his eyes, today's ball that she had been preparing for and looking forward to for a long time was just a farce. How could he be so ridiculous? Her brother crown prince did not know how to choose a dance partner. Perhaps he already had one. Even if he wanted to choose, he would not choose her. Zhou's eyes were emotionless. She sadly raised her head and looked in the direction of the second floor. There was no one on the second floor. Her hand that was tightly holding the empty champagne glass trembled. Endless disappointment and exhaustion flooded her heart. The bright red dress on her body was like blood, making her heart palpitate. She felt like she was a big joke. Her fingers suddenly lost strength. The empty champagne glass fell to the ground and broke into countless pieces, never to be put back together again. At the back of the crowd, Shi Qinghai frowned. He retracted his gaze from the champagne glass and looked at Su Lu, who was standing in the middle of the field. He couldn't figure out what had happened. Previously, when Su Lu had rushed out, he had been prepared to watch a good show. He wanted to see how his brother would snatch the crown prince's beloved from him. But who would have thought that the strange and mysterious crown prince would actually play such a trick? Could it be that Su Lu knew the crown prince before? Shi Qinghai's frown deepened as a trace of doubt flashed through his clear eyes. He subconsciously turned his head to look at the uncle next to him, wanting to get some information from the intelligence leader. However, he was surprised to find that the man's face did not show the slightest surprise at all. He just looked at Su Lu gently under the light, as if he had already guessed all of this. "What do you know?" Shi Qinghai lowered his voice and asked coldly, "Did you know that Su Lu and the crown prince knew each other, so you want to get to know Su Lu through me?" The second leader of the anti-government army smiled slightly and said softly, "The intelligence only said that Su Lu and the crown prince had once gone to war together. I thought that they should have a good relationship, but I didn't expect the crown prince to be so playful as to push your friend out." Shi Qinghai's delicate eyebrows trembled. He suddenly thought of the phone call that Su Lu had given him a few days ago. Could it be that Su Lu had gone to war together with the heir of the Tai family that morning because he was heartbroken? Thinking of this, Shi Qinghai was shocked. The person who was even more shocked than Mr. Shi was, without a doubt, Zhang Xiaoming, who was sitting opposite Su Lu. She covered her mouth tightly and looked at Su Lu, who was bathed in the silver light not far in front of her. She immediately guessed why Su Lu had run to the center of the field just now, but she couldn't understand why the light had enveloped Su Lu. Su Lu didn't understand either, but he knew that the person on the second floor was Tai Ziyuan, so he knew that the light that had lit him up in front of everyone was definitely that guy's doing. He turned his head and was about to find Tai Ziyuan behind the railing on the second floor, so that he could quickly turn off the damn light beam. Growing up, Su Lu was not used to being the center of attention. Furthermore, he was carrying a huge secret on his back. What made him even more uncomfortable was that he did not have wings on his back. How could he float in such a pillar of light? The moment he turned his head, there was another round of exclamations from around the field. He was shocked to find that the dazzling light beam above his head had left him and was floating towards Zhang Xiaoming, who was not far from him. The situation suddenly changed. Looking at the light beam moving, the exclamations rose again. Zhang Xiaoming looked at the light beam moving towards her in disbelief. She subconsciously took a step back with her right foot, wanting to avoid it, but stopped at the last moment. Under the silver light beam, the girl in blue, who was as pure as the sky, instantly occupied everyone's eyes. Su Lu was anxious. He turned around and shouted towards the second floor, "Tai Ziyuan, this is mine." There were already too many surprises at Lihua University's Double Moon Festival dance party today. However, in the dreamlike scene under the beam of light, this young male student declared his ownership of a certain girl in front of everyone in a loud and resonant voice, and even a little vulgar. It still surprised everyone, especially when some people remembered that he seemed to have directly criticized the name of the heir of the Shu Foundation. Tai Ziyuan, who was in front of the screen on the second floor, almost laughed when he heard this loud sentence. However, he restrained his smile and felt a little uncomfortable. He whispered to himself, "Of course I know it's yours." A calm voice that could silence the listeners rang out in the dance party. This voice sounded very normal, but it seemed to have a trace of magic. In an instant, all the exclamations and discussions in the hall were suppressed, leaving the hall silent. That was Tai Ziyuan's gentle and polite voice. After he expressed his apology, he explained softly, "Now, standing in the middle of the dance party, standing under the silver light of the two moons, is a friend of mine and the girl he loves. There have been many beautiful stories at the Double Moon Festival dance party, including those of my parents. I hope that at my coming-of-age ceremony, there will also be a beautiful story that will be passed down for many years to come. Please give him a round of applause and blessings." At this point in the story, the people at the dance party thought that they finally understood what had happened. After a moment of silence, warm applause rang out. A small portion of the applause was to praise the generosity of the successor of the Shu Foundation on the second floor. He had turned his coming-of-age ceremony into a scene of a friend's courtship. However, most of the applause was to bless the couple bathed in the silver moonlight. At this time, Su Lu noticed that the light beam above his head did not disappear. The light beam that moved toward Zhang Xiaoming was only one of the two lights. At this time, it was late at night. The applause rang out, and the clear light from the transparent dome spilled down. In the dim dance party, only the two lights fell on top of his and Zhang Xiaoming's heads. It was very eye-catching. Zhang Xiaoming put down the hand that was on her lips in shock. She watched in disbelief as Su Lu, shrouded in the light, walked step by step toward her. In the eyes of the bystanders, following Su Li's footsteps, the light beam above his head moved as well. It gradually merged with the girl in the blue dress under the moonlight. Just like the two moons in the night sky that were gradually merging into one, it was such a beautiful scene. The applause became louder, and there were a few mischievous whistles in between. Sulu finally walked in front of Zhang Xiaoming. He looked at the cute little blue dress on the girl's shoulders and fell silent. For a moment, he did not know what to say. Yes, this beautiful scene at this time was like a dream. It was enough to intoxicate everyone. Sulu was deeply grateful that Tai Ziyuan had actually arranged such an unexpected scene for him. However, he was a practical person. He always felt that dreams were just dreams, not real life. Zhang Xiaoming did not say anything. She pursed her lips tightly and looked at him with a trace of stubbornness. In the imagination of every young man and woman for the future and for love, this scene at tonight's dance party was definitely the most beautiful courtship scene. It was not that she had not fantasized about it, but seeing it become reality, her feelings were unusually complicated and strange. She did not know why this dance party suddenly turned out like this. Because of the silence of the male and female leads, the applause gradually subsided. Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head and said softly, "The person upstairs is called Tai Ziyuan." He did not expect her first sentence to be like this. Su Li's mood was a little down. He smiled bitterly and said, "Everything was just to get close to him?" The two of them spoke very softly. No one could hear them. In the eyes of others, they would probably think that the two of them were whispering sweet words of love. Zhang Xiaoming slowly raised her head. The moonlight shone on her delicate cheeks, illuminating the slightest detail in her ears. Her delicate and pretty eyes blinked. She suppressed the trace of anger in her heart and asked softly, "Are you his friend? You knew that I wanted to get close to him, so you kept lying to me?" Su Lu frowned and replied, "You kept it from me. I don't know why you wanted to get close to him, and I don't want to know. I just want to know what those days, that night, meant to you." Zhang Xiaoming's eyes dimmed a little. She knew that Su Lu was telling the truth. She used to think that Su Lu was just a poor and honest student. She never thought that her goal of returning to the university would turn out to be his friend. How did the heir of the Tai family become friends with Su Lu? Her emotions were very complicated. After hearing this sentence, her heart felt like it had been stabbed by a needle. It was extremely painful. "I'm sorry." Zhang Xiaoming took a deep breath. She felt that things in the world were too ridiculous. Just like the ice-cold daughter of the Zhou family not far behind her, she felt that this ball, especially herself, was a complete joke. Under the silver light of the two moons, the girl was very sad. For the person she believed in, for the person she was willing to sacrifice. She once gave up her love with great heartache. But at the end of the story, she realized that at that time, she did not need to give up anything. This kind of pain made her feel frustrated and helpless. Chapter 105. Not all stories have happy endings. Not every fairy tale ends with a prince and a princess living happily ever after. Today was the Double Moon Festival. Under the two beams of silver moonlight, the man and woman facing each other in silence were not a prince and a princess. Their story was a bit complicated. God had deliberately created obstacles called misunderstandings and coincidences. Most importantly, they were people walking on different paths in life. At this time, they had completely different ideals and goals in life. "I don't know how to dance." After a moment of silence, Sula looked at Zhang Xiaoming's smooth shoulders that were exposed outside of her little dress and stared at the girl's cute collarbone. Suddenly, he thought of the words, "locking autumn," and said, "I don't know your secret, but if you have an important and necessary purpose for approaching the source of danger, perhaps I can help you convey it. I don't know how to dance either." Zhang Xiaoming's hands were slightly clenched by her waist. Her voice was a bit light. "And dancing with me will bring you trouble." Su Lu raised his head and looked directly into her eyes. He said calmly, "Just like what I said outside the teaching building that day, I always feel that you like me. If that's the case, why can't we be together? I have my own reasons." Zhang Xiaoming raised her face slightly. The faint unwillingness and stubbornness on her face were obvious. "I didn't expect things to develop like this. Right now, my heart is in a mess. At this time, if I say anything to you, if I ask anything of you, it will always make me feel like I'm using you, and I don't like this feeling. Sulu didn't understand this sentence, but his heart naturally felt a bit heavy. After a moment, he said, "When you want to tell me your secret, please contact me. I'm always available." Zhang Xiaoming bowed slightly to him and said softly, "Maybe that day won't come. I'm sorry." "You've already said sorry too many times in the past few days." Su Li's eyes narrowed with some annoyance. He said, "I don't like to hear it." "Okay." Zhang Xiaoming suddenly puffed up her cheeks and laughed, looking very cute. She tilted her head and winked at him, saying, "Since none of you know how to dance, then I'll leave first." However, Su Lu could see the sadness in the girl's heart from her cute and clean appearance. His heart sank as he watched Zhang Xiaoming turn around and walk towards the exit of the ball. There was another uproar in the ballroom. Everyone's eyes followed Zhang Xiaoming's departure. The beam of light also followed Zhang Xiaoming's departure. Everyone thought that this would be another romantic story that would be remembered for many years in the history of Yue University's Double Moon Festival. However, no one expected that the female lead of the story would leave silently. Looking at the girl in blue who was gradually moving away with the beam of light, the people who were watching this scene felt as if they were watching a stage play in the capital's Gothic theater. Naturally, there was an indescribable faint sadness in their hearts. Su Lu silently looked at Zhang Xiaoming's back. After a moment, he decisively turned around and left in the opposite direction. The beam of light above his head was still enveloping him, moving with his lonely back. If the previous beam of light was incomparably romantic, then the current beam of light was particularly glaring. Su Lu was a little depressed. He looked up at the beam of light above his head and suddenly said, "It's not like we're filming a tragedy. What's the point of creating an atmosphere?" There was something wrong with this sentence. There was a kind of anger hidden under the calm. The beam of light seemed to feel fear and instantly extinguished. The entire ballroom was plunged into darkness. Only the bright full moon that was tens of thousands of kilometers away shone down on them. The lights came back on, and the beautiful dance music started again. Yue University's Double Moon Festival dance continued. The waiters respectfully walked through the ballroom with wine glasses and food. However, the atmosphere was a little awkward. It was difficult to return to the lively and happy mood from before. Some people had already left. Zhang Xiaoming left alone. Zhou left with a sad expression. Even the group of rich kids from the capital left the ballroom silently. In their eyes, the behavior of the Tai family's heir was an authentic farce. Of course, he had the right to do so. However, they were not in a good mood, especially when they thought about what happened after they came to Linhai. Before these people left, they coldly looked at Su Li's back. Life still had to go on, especially for the ordinary young people of the Federation. The highlight of the ballroom did not have a happy ending, but their love still had to ferment under the moonlight. Accompanied by the melodious dance music, the atmosphere gradually became lively. Many couples walked onto the dance floor and began to dance. Shi Qinghai, who had disappeared for a moment, returned to his original position. He calmly looked at Su Lu, who was walking towards him, and said in an extremely low voice, "The 12 special agents of the Special Task Force are outside the building. The ones inside the building should be the Tai family's own bodyguards." The middle-aged man beside him looked at Su Lu, who was getting closer and closer, and smiled slightly. This spy leader of the anti-government forces trusted Old Eagle's ability and was not worried about his own safety. Instead, he brought up another topic. "I suddenly thought of something. If Zhou had succumbed to your threat, and if this hadn't happened so suddenly, would it have been Zhang Xiaoming who went up to the second floor?" I'm not used to evaluating the abilities of amateurs. Shi Qinghai looked straight ahead with a calm expression. "No, I admire Comrade Medellin's arrangements." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "The more amateurish you are, the easier it is to succeed. It's getting harder and harder for professionals like you to survive." Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and did not answer. He patted Su Li's shoulders as a gesture of consolation. The middle-aged man looked at Su Lu and smiled. At this moment, a waiter came in front of the three of them and very politely invited Su Lu. In the doorway of a room on the second floor, Su Lu looked at the middle-aged man beside him in surprise and asked, "Uncle, when did you come up?" The waiter maintained his calm and politeness. He was only sending out the invitation on behalf of the young master. As for how those ugly middle-aged men came up, that was something that needed to be filtered by the security department. It was not part of his job scope. The middle-aged man smiled and said, "No one stopped me. Besides, didn't you just promise me that as long as you went up to the second floor, you would take me with you?" These words were obviously not true. The Double Moon Festival Ball seemed to be lax in security, but in reality, to go from the first floor to the second floor, who knew how many steps one had to go through? Although Su Lu was covering for them, this middle-aged man's ability was too frightening. At this moment, the door opened. Su Lu shrugged indifferently. Under the guidance of the waiter, he walked in with this strange uncle beside him. This was a very large suite. The floor was covered with a woolen carpet. The furnishings around were quite ancient. There was not much of a modern electronic style. A curtain, a lamp, they all looked very elegant. In the deepest part of the suite, on a huge sofa, sat a young man with a slightly pale complexion. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call him a teenager, because every time Su Lu saw him, he always felt that his body was very weak and his figure was somewhat thin. "Thank you." Suddenly knowing the real identity of the teenager in front of him. Although it was far from his real identity, Su Lu still felt like there was a door between him and Tai Ziyuan. He found it hard to get used to it. His voice was slightly dry as he said, "I didn't expect you to give me such a big surprise." Tai Ziyuan obviously guessed Su Li's reaction after seeing him. He smiled slightly, pointed to a chair beside him, and said, "Sit. Don't be so reserved." It was very strange. This kind of tone was usually used by a superior to a subordinate, but when it was spoken by Tai Ziyuan, it sounded so natural. Su Lu frowned slightly. He was not used to it and also felt a little uncomfortable, but he still sat on a chair beside the sofa. The room was silent. The two of them did not seem to know what topic to talk about. After all, they used to talk most of the time through the communicator and that piece of paper. Even after they finally met, they did not have much time to talk like ordinary people. Su Lu did not know what the Xioshu Foundation was, nor did he know what the Tai family represented in the Federation. He did not know Tai Ziyuan's history, but he felt that the Tai Ziyuan on the sofa at this moment was not the same person as the Tai Ziyuan he usually knew at night. At night, Tai Ziyuan was an ordinary young man who was a little proud, a little cold, and a little bored. But at this moment, Tai Ziyuan was like a monster who was born with a certain kind of aura. In this silence, the only exception was the middle-aged man who followed Su Lu into the room. The middle-aged man had his hands behind his back, and like a tourist, he stared at the small decorations in the room with interest. It seemed that he did not want to participate in this conversation at all. Butler Jean, who had been standing silently beside the sofa, stared at the middle-aged man with a complicated expression. He suddenly said, "Student Su, who is this?" Su Lu was stunned. He smiled embarrassedly and introduced the middle-aged man to Tai Ziyuan and Butler Jean. "This is my friend's uncle. He asked me to take him to the second floor. I didn't know you were upstairs at that time, so I just casually agreed. I didn't expect that this old man would actually follow us up. Just because you don't know doesn't mean that everyone doesn't know." Tai Ziyuan glanced at the middle-aged man and said with a smile, "Would you like to sit down and have a chat? You guys chat first. You guys chat first. I'm not in a hurry." The second in command of the anti-government forces waved his hand with a smile, completely unaware that he was in danger. Strangely enough, after he said that, Tai Ziyuan really did not care about him anymore. He just let the middle-aged man wander around his room. He turned his head and looked at Su Lu with a gentle smile and said, "Let's get to know each other again. Su Lu, I'm Tai Ziyuan." The atmosphere in the room finally relaxed. Su Lu said with a smile, "Of course I know. I also guessed that your family must be rich, but I didn't expect it to be to this extent. I've heard of the Cultivation Foundation, but I think you definitely don't know my real identity." Tai Ziyuan looked at him and said calmly, "The Cultivation Foundation is just something for ordinary people to see. My family and some other rich and idle families gathered together. The people of the Federation gave us a name, something called the Seven Great Families. I think you've heard of it before. Sulu listened to this sentence in shock. He suddenly remembered that he had found the surname familiar a long time ago. He asked in disbelief, "Is it the Tai family whose ancestors were emperors?" Not many people still remember things that happened tens of thousands of years ago. "Looks like you're pretty good at history," Tai Ziwan said with a smile. Chapter 106. Since the 37th constitutional era, the Federation had already undergone many political structural reforms. Although there were not many changes in essence, there would always be a distinction between the old and the new. The last major reform in the Federation had occurred over 600 years ago. People were also used to calling the recent Federation the New Federation. However, regardless of whether it was in the history textbooks of the new or old Federation schools, the description of the history of human civilization before the constitutional era was always rather vague. Perhaps it was because it was too long ago and there was no detailed historical information. Perhaps it was because the Federation's educators believed that the citizens, who were bathed in the glory of democracy and freedom, should look more toward the beautiful future and not reminisce about the imperial era that was actually not beautiful due to the aesthetic illusion created by the difference in time. It was precisely because of this reason that, other than those specialized historians, there were not many Federation citizens who still cared about the imperial society from tens of thousands of years ago. Although the history textbooks had taught these things, not many people could remember that the last imperial family had the surname Yin. Therefore, when Sulu blurted out the origins of the Tai family, Tai Ziwan could not help but be a little surprised. He smiled and praised his historical knowledge. Sulu was immersed in shock and did not hear the other's praise. He only subconsciously recalled those years in the Donglin region, those days when Uncle Feng you had made him soak in the library and read books every day. The history of the imperial court was too long ago. However, the seven great families of the Federation were deeply engraved in the minds of all Federation citizens. Even though Sulu had been far away in the remote Donglin region back then, he still knew that the Federation had seven extremely influential families. These families' industries were distributed in various areas of the Federation, secretly influencing the entire Federation's energy development, finance, welfare, and employment. No matter how the president of the Federation changed, or how the election of members of parliament was repeated, it would not affect the status of these seven great families in the Federation. Just like a certain proverb said, the Federation is the seven great families. Perhaps this sentence was a bit exaggerated, but no one could ignore the shadows of these seven families in the history of the Federation civilization. The most frightening thing was that no one knew how large the shadows of these seven families were. In the early years of the constitutional era, every once in a while the Federation government would have a president or a powerful management committee that was deeply trusted by the people. These political figures would always try to, with the support of the people and the media, completely separate the Federation from the influence of the seven families. However, no matter what kind of laws and presidential orders those successful presidents and powerful management committees passed, it was still impossible to find out the true strength of the seven families. The Citizens Property Declaration Act, the Corporations Property Transparency Act, the Anti-Monopoly Law, the Anti-Monopoly Law Amendment Bill. Countless laws and regulations did not play their role in the face of the silence of these families. The Federation of that era was equivalent to a battlefield where the government and the seven families fought desperately. 3 presidents were killed by assassinations, and the truth was still not found out. Under the strict control of the government, the seven families also lost a lot of benefits. It was said that one family almost lost its inheritance and was destroyed. However, apart from the bloodshed, in the eyes of historians, the life and death struggles of those years were not necessarily without any benefits. The federal government's control of the 7 major families had, to a large extent, perfected the legal structure of the Federation and the seven major families' counteraction against the federal government had also prevented the emergence of an overly powerful government. As the era progressed, the seven families were part of the Federation and could not fight like this forever. The huge industries hidden in the society of the seven families could only be sustained in a relatively long-term and stable social structure. They could not openly choose to stand on the opposite side of the government and the people. And those politicians who needed votes also began to realize that if they could obtain the support of the seven families, then their future political path would be very smooth. Both sides had needs, so under the subtle influence of benefits, the Federation began to develop in a different direction. The politicians began to secretly seek the help of the seven families, and the seven families began to choose their own political partners, using the family's own strength to help these partners obtain the votes of the citizens of the Federation. They could only be partners, and the politicians could not completely become the spokespersons of the seven families. Because the politicians who lost the necessity of their independent existence would inevitably yield to the pressure of the seven families, and the natural desire of the seven families' huge wealth would turn these politicians into their tools for profit, which would inevitably violate the rights and interests of the majority of ordinary citizens in the short term. The social unrest that followed was a terrible result that anyone with foresight in the Federation, and even the seven families themselves, did not want to see. This was an instinctive choice to live together, but to forcibly suppress these collusion within the bottom line that the Federation citizens could bear. And because of the tacit understanding between the Federation government and the seven families that had never been seen on paper, the seven families had always maintained a somewhat mysterious and lofty image in the hearts of the Federation citizens. The human heart had always had a natural desire for the strong, and the existence of the seven families just so happened to satisfy this psychological need of the Federation citizens, just so happened to offset some of the citizens' dissatisfaction with certain unfairness in society. It had to be said that the media played a very important role in this. Whether or not the mysterious and lofty seven families had done anything that specifically harmed ordinary citizens, no one knew, right? All of this only changed slightly with the appearance of the scholar George Carlin. The anti-government forces that had bitterly held on in the S2 mountains suddenly found a political program that was more suitable for the needs of the Federation citizens. They pointed the spearhead of their struggle at the relationship between the Federation government and the seven families, and from George Carlin's teachings, they put forward the part that they needed the most. They demanded that the politicians of the Federation and the seven families that were never willing to appear in front of the Federation citizens return the wealth that had been exploited from the hands of ordinary citizens for countless years. They demanded that the seven families must pay the true price for the damage they had done to the democracy and freedom of the Federation throughout history. The anti-government forces gradually gave up on the use of force. The moderate faction led by Senator Macklin held the banner of George Carlin and successfully influenced the four mountainous regions of the S2 region and set off a huge wave in the hearts of the young Federation citizens. However, this was still not enough to threaten the status of the seven great families in the Federation. These seven families were even very happy to see the existence of Senator Macklin. This was because as long as any conflict entered the path of an election, it was a process that could be controlled, influenced, or at least negotiated. As for the thoughts that were prevalent among the young people, the seven families weren't afraid of them. Young people were always hot-blooded. When they left school and entered society, they entered various companies and government departments. They naturally understood how difficult and unrewarding it was to vainly go against the historical traditions of the Federation. The seven great families had existed coldly and tyrannically every day since the birth of the Federation. Furthermore, they had grown stronger with each passing day. If someone were to say that they had already controlled most of the lifelines of the Federation, it would not be considered an exaggeration. Moreover, it seemed that they would continue to exist until the day the Federation came to an end. This fact couldn't help but shock people. The reason why the seven families were so mysterious was because the lives of the truly important people had never appeared in any news or documentary. They only existed in imagination and on the Federation's television channels, and only existed in Evergreen City's film reels. There was also no scholar or government organization that could truly investigate which family controlled which part of the Federation's industry. There was only one exception, and that was the Zhong family of the Westwoods. Because the Zhong family's 4th military region had guarded the edge of the universe for generations for the Federation, it had long been exposed to the public due to an accident at the beginning of the first constitutional era. It couldn't hide its enormous figure. On the contrary, the names of the 7 families weren't much of a secret. Even Su Lu could easily name the inherited surnames of 6 of the families. Among the 7 families, there was only one family that was truly low-key and mysterious, and that was the Tai family. Not many people knew that this Tai family was actually the descendant of the royal family that ruled the entire human society a long time ago. When Su Lu heard Tai Yuan admit that he was the successor of the Tai family, he couldn't help but be momentarily stunned. For a long time, he couldn't speak. This identity wasn't the son of a rich family or the son of a politician. Instead, it represented a kind of history, a kind of omnipresent influence. The successor of the 7 families, if placed in ancient times, would at least be considered a king. After being in shock for so long, Su Lu slowly came back to his senses. The first thing he thought of was a question. He stared blankly at the pale youth on the sofa and muttered, "Why did you tell me? Why did Tai Yuan tell him his true identity?" This was Su Li's first question after he recovered from the shock. If the other party was the bright moon hanging high in the night sky, then he was at most an inconspicuous osmanthus tree by the Rose River. The two of them were not people of the same world. Even if they had gotten along like ordinary friends a few days ago, once the other party's identity was revealed, it was like a gap between the two of them, and no matter what, it was impossible to fill the gap. "You're a very good friend." From a moment Tai Yuan revealed his identity, he had been calmly and attentively observing Su Li's expression. He was very satisfied that he didn't see any reaction in Su Li's eyes that he didn't like. He admired this friend of his even more for being able to recover from the shock so quickly and talk to him like a normal person. "I used to have friends, but after they knew my identity, they didn't have the courage to get along with me like friends. They either left quietly or became people like Yuzi. I think if we continue to be friends, one day, you will also face this dilemma." Tai Yuan smiled gently and said, "If that's the case, I might as well tell you in advance." The reason why Su Lu recovered so quickly was because of his experience over the years. Chapter 107. You can't blame others for this sort of thing. After hearing Tai Yuan sigh, Su Lu was rather disapproving. After a moment of silence, he decided to voice his own opinion. "You are the heir of the 7 great families. Compared to us commoners, you were born from 2 different worlds. Perhaps you yourself have never noticed it. No matter how much you pretend to be gentle, as long as you are in front of others. For example, right now, you will always naturally reveal some sort of aura." Tai Yuan looked at him with interest and asked, "What kind of aura?" "I can't say for sure." Su Lu laughed bitterly. "In any case, it's not something I like very much. Perhaps it's a little too calm, as if everything in the world is within your grasp. Perhaps the people around you are already used to you being like this, but when I first met you, you were just an ordinary student with some money, so I'm not used to it." After hearing this, Tai Yuan could not help but laugh and say, "I never thought that in your eyes, I would actually be so unbearable." Su Lu explained, "It's not unbearable, it's just not used to it." Tai Yuan was silent for a moment, and then said seriously, "What you say makes sense. I shouldn't ask for too much. This world has never been fair. Some people are born with more resources and power than others, like me. I won't pretentiously say that this is a kind of distress because, other than me, everyone seems to want to have this kind of distress, but can't." He looked at Su Li's ordinary and amiable face and said calmly, "Let's talk about something else. Did you have fun in the combat room this morning?" Changing the topic to talk about the black mecha walking around with its belly full, Su Li's mood finally relaxed a little, no longer treating the youth on the sofa as some sort of monster. He scratched his head and said sincerely, "Thank you for covering for me. To survive in this society, you need a lot of opportunities. Not everyone can encounter a chance to shine. You saw it this morning, but you ran away like you were scared of a ghost." Tai Yuan shook his head and disagreed. "I don't know why you don't want to be famous. This is really not like a normal young man." Sulu thought to himself, "I have my troubles, just like you have your troubles. How do I explain this? Am I supposed to tell you that I am a fugitive from the Federation who is assisting traitors?" In order to hide the complicated emotions in his heart, he narrowed his eyes and smiled. Naturally, he changed the topic. "I've already thanked you before, and now I want to thank you again. After all, it's your coming-of-age ceremony, and you've helped me so much. Oh, when it comes to matters between men and women, no matter how much I help you, that Miss Xiaoming will ignore you. It's useless." Tai Zuan looked at him with a faint smile and said, "As for the coming-of-age ceremony, you have already taken me there dozens of hours ago. Today, these should be my return gift to you." As he spoke, Tai Yuan took out a red envelope from his pocket and bitterly smiled. "See this? This is the red envelope given to me by the girl in Star Clubhouse." Su Lu saw the red envelope in his hand and forcibly suppressed his laughter. He felt that this matter was extremely ridiculous, but for some reason, he actually felt a little proud. The two heirs of the 7 major families of the Federation. One was raised by him for a few days, and the other was taken by him to lose her virginity. If this were to be made into a TV series, it would probably break Channel 23's ratings record. It had to be said that Tai Ziwan was a person who was very good at controlling the rhythm of the conversation and the atmosphere. Under this red envelope, the sensitive attitude of the two young people gradually disappeared, and the two people's sitting posture also became much more relaxed. In addition to the clubhouse, I also want to thank you for the pancakes and porridge you brought me these past few nights. Thinking about it this way, as the heir of the Tai family, you seem to be a little too stingy. Sulu was also in the mood to joke. Even more stingy than that A-list girl. At least she gave you a red envelope, but you only gave me 2 lights. As he said this, his gaze became suspicious because he saw Tai Zuan smile and hand him a piece of paper. When he took a look, Su Li's expression changed a little. He looked at Tai Zuan in surprise. Jian Shuener's concert tickets? Why haven't I heard of this before? Next week, Jian Shuener will release her first solo album. Tai Zuan retracted his hand and looked at him with a smile. With her influence in the Federation, she will hold a celebration concert in about a month, and in fact, she has already booked the time and location of the concert. I know you're infatuated with this girl. Is this gift of thanks comparable to those overnight pancakes you bought? Su Lu pretended not to hear the mischievous meaning in the other party's words and scratched his head in disbelief. Probably only the heir of one of the 7 major families could get a VIP ticket when Jian Shuener's concert was still in preparation. For Su Lu, Jian Shuener was not as simple as an idol. To him, the face of the purple-haired girl who appeared on Channel 23 every night represented the company he had all these years, the years he was no longer lonely, the memories he had in Donglin District, the demonstrations on Gulu Street. Looking at the thin ticket in his hand, Su Lu was stunned for a moment, thinking that he would see Jian Shuener with his own eyes in a month's time. He did not react for a long time. I actually never wanted to see Jian Shuener. Su Lu was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He was not a groupie, and Jian Shuener was a very symbolic figure to him. He would rather keep a distance and watch from afar. But even so, he still carefully put the ticket into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "But thank you anyway." Su Lu looked at the familiar yet unfamiliar Tai Zuan on the sofa and said, "You didn't have to do this." Tai Zuan sat on the sofa, holding a cup of coffee and drinking it tastelessly. After Su Lu left, he suddenly felt that there was nothing for him to do. The Double Moon Festival Ball was meaningless to him. He knew very well what he should do and what he should do. That young man named Su Lu could not be considered his true friend yet. He had always doubted whether he would ever have a true friend in this lifetime. If Su Li's appearance in his life was an accident, Tai Zuan did not reject this kind of accident. In fact, he was willing to let this kind of accident exist for a while longer. After meeting this interesting and poor student for the past few days, Tai Ziwan was also very surprised that he could actually get along and talk to him like a normal person. But what would happen after his identity was exposed? Tai Ziwan's eyes were very sharp. From the details of the past few days, he could confirm that Su Lu was a trustworthy and sincere person. It was just that his personality seemed to be a little too stubborn. Moreover, Tai Ziwan increasingly found that Su Lu was actually a very capable person. It was just that this guy always intentionally or unintentionally hid some aspects of his abilities. Tai Ziwan admired Su Li's character and ability. He even had the idea of including this young man in the family, watching him grow up, and recruiting him as a capable subordinate in the future. However, after today's conversation, he keenly noticed Su Li's natural resistance to certain possibilities. Although the two sides did not say it explicitly, it was already revealed in their words and expressions. When Su Li left, he asked where you were. I told him that you had already left. Tai Ziwan stopped thinking about those things and returned to his usual calmness. He looked at the middle-aged man who came out from behind the bookcase and said, "There's no one else here, so I think it's time for me to introduce myself." The middle-aged man who had followed Su Lu to the second floor seemed to have disappeared during the conversation. He walked in front of Tai Ziwan and, without waiting for instructions from the host, casually sat down on the sofa opposite him. He looked at the young man and said with a smile, "A lot of people are looking for you, but I still beat them to it." Butler Jean handed a cup of coffee to the mysterious middle-aged man and then retreated behind Tai Ziwan in silence. Tai Ziwan gently used a silver spoon to stroke the black coffee in his cup and said, "Since I've already revealed my identity, I know that a lot of people are looking for me. But I also know that Su Lu only has 3 friends, and whether it's Zhang Xiaoming or Shi Qinghai's uncle, they shouldn't have appeared at the ball. Even if they did, they wouldn't have snuck up with Su Lu so easily. Of course, I don't have an uncle who's a secret agent. You should know that on the way upstairs, you could die at any time." Tai Ziwan raised his head and looked calmly at the middle-aged man opposite him. "But you're not afraid at all, and you don't have a weapon on you. So I'm willing to give you, an adventurer, a chance to talk to me. But you have to tell me your name first. After all, I don't want my first negotiation partner to be a guy who's deliberately mystifying." Under that pair of pressurizing eyes, the middle-aged man didn't feel the slightest bit uneasy. He took a sip of his coffee and said, "I'm very grateful that you didn't just kill me earlier. Instead, you gave me a chance to speak. I'm from the mountains." The middle-aged man put down his coffee cup and looked calmly at the teenager on the sofa. "I hope I didn't surprise you." Ing Ziwan fell silent upon hearing this. Behind him, Butler Jean narrowed his eyes, and a cold aura gradually seeped out of him. The Federation's privileged class had always been at odds with the anti-government forces in the mountains. So, this guy was actually from the mountains? After a moment of thought, Tai Ziwan's lips curled into a smile. He asked, "I think you should know that my mother has already rejected Senator Macklin's request for an audience. The leader of Nanshui shouldn't allow someone who can't promise anything to have this conversation. So, it seems that your position in the mountains isn't bad. Senator Macklin hasn't been in the mountains for many years." The middle-aged man very naturally explained Tai Ziwan's question. "What's your ranking in the mountains?" Tai Ziwan frowned slightly as he stared at the middle-aged man's abnormally wretched face. "I directly assist Senator Nanshui in his work," the middle-aged man said seriously. "So, I have the qualifications to act on his behalf." No matter how calm Tai Ziwan was, after hearing this answer, his pupils couldn't help but shrink. Behind him, Butler Jean was even more regretful. If he had known this person's true identity earlier, he definitely wouldn't have let the young master take such a risk to meet with this person. Chapter 108. To be able to meet the heir of the most mysterious and oldest family in the Federation, and to be able to meet such a young heir who is full of courage and judgment. This is my honor. The middle-aged man didn't seem to have the aura of the anti-government forces in the mountains. Instead, he was like a businessman who gently expressed his respect for the Tai family. I didn't expect you anti-government forces to flatter like the politicians in the Federation. Tai Yuan said with slight sarcasm. If it can make you feel better, I don't mind flattering you even louder. Tai Yuan looked at the second-in-command of the anti-government forces not far in front of him. He gradually compared the image with the image in the information, but he found that the two images didn't match. No matter if it's the Federation or your organization, it seems that you only have one code name, and that is him. He gradually calmed down and said, but in a conversation, there's always a need for a name. Child Tai, you can call me a mountain man, the middle-aged man said. Tai Yuan calmly but firmly shook his head. I don't like this kind of literary name. The middle-aged man smiled and said, then you can call me Zhongsai. Okay, Mr. Zhongsai, I don't want to say things like how stupid you are. You should know better than me how many people in the Federation want you dead. Tai Yuan knew that he wasn't facing an ordinary person, but a very troublesome and powerful figure in the Federation. Moreover, this was the first time in his adult life that he truly represented the Tai family in a conversation with the major forces as the heir of the Tai family. Therefore, he was very cautious and said a few more words to buy time for himself to calm down. Please tell me your intention directly. He stared at the middle-aged man's ugly triangular eyes and asked directly. I come with the request of the 70,000 soldiers in the mountains, the hope of the 13 million citizens of the Federation in the mountains, and the trust of Comrade Nanshui. The middle-aged man's tone was very serious at this moment. I come with the intention of peace, and I hope to get a response from the Federation. Peace? This was such a familiar, yet strange word. This was especially true for the conflict between the Federation government and the anti-government army. How many years had it been since the anti-government army fought in the 4 prefectures? Although the military had gradually faded in the past 2 decades, the upper echelons of the Federation knew that the foundation of the anti-government forces was still above their military strength. Both sides have been fighting back for countless years, and countless people have been sacrificed. Blood had dyed every inch of the mountain red. Peace. Tai Yuan's fingers that were stirring the coffee instantly stiffened. A strange expression gradually appeared on his pale face. He had never thought that the second-in-command of the anti-government army would go straight to the point and actually throw out such a heavyweight bomb. The peace negotiations between the Federation government and the anti-government forces had gone through countless rounds and produced countless peace agreements. However, in the end, due to the betrayal of one party or the outbreak of an unexpected incident, the paper agreement would be put to rest. Even though the moderate faction of the anti-government forces had long ascended onto the Federation's political stage and began to seek the support of the voters with a non-violent image, in reality, in those areas outside of the media's reach, the armed conflict between the government and anti-government forces had always continued. If this was a normal peace negotiation, Tai Yuan definitely wouldn't be so shocked. However, since the person in front of him was the second-in-command of the anti-government forces, a core strength that was deeply trusted by Nanshui, the peace he spoke of was naturally not the peace on paper. It was a real peace that could be implemented. You should contact the President's office or the Ministry of Defense directly. Tai Yuan took a deep breath and suppressed the faint excitement in his heart. He calmly said, if you are truly willing to return the Federation to a period of peace without civil war, I will represent the Tai family to express a 120% welcome and immediately provide full support to the 4 prefectures. These words were said beautifully, but in reality, they were equivalent to not saying anything. The peace negotiations between the government and the anti-government forces should have been left to the politicians and professional soldiers to negotiate. Tai Yuan didn't have the urge to participate. He knew that, admittedly, this could bring him abundant political capital and a good reputation among the citizens. However, this was a matter that was destined to be complicated and extremely risky. If he wasn't careful, it could become a black hole that swallowed everything. Young Master Tai must be joking. If I could talk to the president of the Federation or those soldiers, I naturally wouldn't come to find you, the middle-aged man said calmly. The middle-aged man replied calmly, the federal government is used to going back on their word. If we really put down the guns in our hands and stop the roaring of the armored vehicles' engines, perhaps the next day, countless mechas and planes will begin to attack the mountainous area. Then you still shouldn't have come to find me. Tai Yuan said as calmly as he could. I'm just a young man who is still studying. You can't expect me to do anything. But everyone in the major factions wants to get in touch with you at this time, because everyone knows that after the coming-of-age ceremony, Lady Tai will gradually return the family business to your hands, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Moreover, Lady Tai is not that easy to meet. I am not Senator Macklin. I am someone who is still on the Federation's war criminal list. If I dare to reveal my identity and ask to meet her in the capital's special region, I'm sure that after 3 minutes, countless soldiers will begin to hunt me down. That's right. It's always easier to meet a student like me, Tai Yuan said, but the problem is although I just completed the coming-of-age ceremony, according to the family rules, I can't immediately decide all the family affairs. I believe that Lady Tai will gradually transfer the decision-making power to your hands, the middle-aged man said calmly. The mysterious Tai family has kept a low profile for countless years, although they still haven't announced your coming-of-age ceremony this year. Those who have gradually come to Yue University have proven that Lady Tai has no intention of continuing to hide your existence from the public. If my guess is correct, after you finish your studies at Yue University, you will enter the military. Perhaps you will even go to the front lines in the West Woods to accumulate military merits. After that, you will begin to enter the government and begin to work as a government official. About 10 years later, you will begin to enter the political world to prepare for that final goal. Final goal? Tai Yuan's eyes narrowed. He realized once again that this extremely mysterious man in the Federation's files was indeed not someone who could be easily controlled. At the very least, this man had an extremely powerful intelligence system and analytical ability. This ability in itself was enough to shock people. Other than the president, when the great Tai family steps out into the open for the first time, what kind of role play on the stage would you be interested in? The middle-aged man said with a smile. But that is a matter for many years to come. What we're talking about now is something that will happen soon. Speaking of what would happen soon, this middle-aged man's tone became much more serious and cautious. The federal military has been preparing for a military invasion of the mountainous region. This has made Comrade Nanshui and I feel an unprecedented pressure. The Federation's successive embargoes and sanctions have caused the resources in the mountainous region to be extremely scarce. Even if the citizens of the Federation who sympathize with you want to continue the secret donations from the past few years, due to the lack of channels, they are unable to send the donations to you. Furthermore, due to the existence of Senator Macklin, your base of support from the people in the 4 states surrounding the mountainous region has been greatly divided. Tai Yuan easily pointed out the predicament that the anti-government forces were in. The people who support you are becoming fewer and fewer. Is that why you have thought of the word peace? The times are stronger than the people. A trace of vicissitudes of life flashed across the middle-aged man's face. That is why I have come with sincerity to seek a response from your family. I still don't understand. Tai Yuan didn't feel the slightest bit uneasy just because the other party had exposed his family's future plans for his political future. He said coldly, even if I am already able to make decisions within the family. But what does this have to do with the peace negotiations between you anti-government forces and the government? I have never denied the family's influence on the Federation's politics, but I have never been arrogant enough to think that I can change the attitude of the entire Federation government. But you could try to change the attitude of the Federation president. The middle-aged man looked at Tai Yuan and said with a smile, Next year is the presidential election. I know that Senator Pabre has already met with the madam. Tai Yuan raised his coffee cup, but he didn't drink it. He was deep in thought for a long time. This head of intelligence of the anti-government forces had once again proven to him the valiant power of the intelligence network under his command. The middle-aged man didn't shut up because of Tai Yuan's silence. He continued his analysis calmly. So, there are a few reasons why I have to take the risk to come here and talk to you. First, compared to the current Federation president and government, We, the anti-government forces, trust Senator Pabre's moral standards more. Secondly, although Councilman Powab had a good reputation among the middle and lower-class citizens of the Federation for the Capital Ring, and especially for S1, which had the most voters, this lawyer who was born in the family of Donglin miners was still a somewhat unfamiliar face. He needs an explosive news event to help him gain the approval of the majority of S1 voters in the shortest amount of time. Third, Senator Pabre has no military experience. He has never shown the courage and determination to deal with unexpected situations. His ability in the field of national security has always been widely doubted. During the election, this will undoubtedly become a weakness for his election opponents to attack. So, we hope that the Thai family can help us so that we can directly negotiate a grand reconciliation agreement with Senator Pabre. The middle-aged man continued slowly. We trust the Thai family's demeanor and Senator Pabre's political ethics. Once the agreement is reached, Senator Pabre will also gain wonderful political capital from it, thus ensuring his success in next year's presidential election. It had to be said that this intelligence leader of the anti-government forces was also an excellent lobbyist. At this moment, Tai Yuan admitted that he was a little tempted, but at the same time, he became more vigilant. This guy from the anti-government forces was actually more experienced than those professional brokers outside of the Capital City Management Committee. This kind of person really couldn't be taken lightly. What kind of conditions do you want? Tai Yuan asked calmly. Before Pabre becomes president, we will begin negotiations. During the negotiations, can the federal military gather troops, take a break first? At the same time, the Federation government's economic blockade. Can we privately open a gap? The middle-aged man smiled and said, after Senator Pabre becomes president, naturally, everything can be discussed. Chapter 109. A book friend mentioned a bug regarding the AI chip and the Bureau of Proclamation. Why would the anti-government army not be caught? Actually, a long time ago, in the chapter when Zhang Xiaoming first appeared, I mentioned this and repeated it many times. The first charter requires one to remain neutral in the internal struggles of the Federation. This is a law. In my setting, it is similar to the status of the anti-government army in current international law. You have to know that the first charter existed long before the Constitution, long before the Federation. There are definitely bugs in the story, but I will try to minimize them. If they are too obvious, I will try to avoid them. P.S. This chapter is 4,000 words long. Today, I will write 3 chapters with 4,000 words. That way, it will be 12,000 words. This will make up for the 2 chapters that I owe everyone. Let me report this to my comrades. Thinking that I will soon be debt-free, how nice. I am very serious about asking everyone for monthly votes as encouragement. The long silence proved that this request made by the anti-government army was an extremely attractive exchange condition for the Thai family, for Tai Yuan, and for Representative Pabre, whom he and his mother had already decided to support. Tai Yuan knew very well that if it weren't for the complicated political environment of the 4 mountain estates, as well as the increasing military pressure of the hawkish figures in the Federation, the anti-government army, led by the leader of Nanshi, definitely wouldn't have taken the initiative to ask for peace. However, he had to admit that even so, the anti-government army still had enough bargaining chips to exchange for the corresponding conditions. During the early stages of the election, Representative Pabre cannot influence the internal decisions of the Federation government. Tai Yuan broke the silence and reminded the other party. Pabre can't, but public opinion can. The Thai family's secret influence can. The middle-aged man said calmly. If the citizens of the Federation knew that the presidential candidate, Representative Pabre, is taking a huge political risk to negotiate peace with us, the ruthless anti-government army, and at this time, the Federation government went against the flow and forcefully launched a military attack against us, they will definitely issue the strongest rebuke to the Federation government. I admit that what you said makes sense. This kind of exchange of benefits is indeed very attractive. After a moment of silence, Tai Yuan said, but I can't answer your request immediately. Please give me some time. I can't stay in the Federation's core area for too long. You should know that. The middle-aged man smiled and said, although the Bureau of Proclamation won't care about me, I still respect the hounds of the Federation and the spiders of the Federation Bureau of Investigation. If I stay in the Federation for too long, I might be underestimating them. Tython pushed the coffee cup aside and said with a smile, since you've already taken the risk to come here, why can't you take the risk and wait for a few more hours? The reason I dared to take the risk and come here today is because I know that no one in the Federation government would guess that I dared to take such a risk. The middle-aged man said calmly, if you stay too long, it's not a risk, it's a fool. Then how should I contact you? With your ability, it should be easy for you to find out how I came in. When the time comes, I'll ask you to pass on the final decision to that young man. The corners of Tai Zuan's lips curled up slightly, and he said with a smile, this way, I still have to guarantee that young man's safety within the Federation's borders. Mr. Boitzai, your considerations have never left anything out. No, I don't even know how much time I've left to run for my life after going down from the second floor, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Tai Zuan quietly stared into his eyes, as if he wanted to discern what the other party had guessed from his words, or if it was just a habitual joke. A moment later, he looked at the other party and said seriously, your considerations are not bad. The exchange of benefits is indeed what I value, but what I value even more is the Federation's future. If I have the chance to capture you and kill you, I don't mind informing the federal military. Right now, I haven't informed them because I respect the role of a negotiator. Tython said calmly, once you leave the scene of the ball, perhaps I really will have the Federation government do everything in their power to capture you. There has always been a saying that if the anti-government army didn't have you, they would have long become a dish in the hands of the government. This kind of temptation is actually no less than reaching a peace agreement. Hearing these words, the middle-aged man smiled slightly. After fighting with the Federation government for so many years, he knew better than anyone how much these privileged people in the Federation wanted to destroy the business in the mountains. These people who truly controlled the Federation were cold and heartless. However, he was sure that the other party wouldn't make a move at this moment at least, because this wasn't in line with the true interests of the other party's family. This time, he was taking a huge risk. He didn't even hesitate to expose his most successful spy within the Federation to meet with the successor of the Tai family. On one hand, it was because the anti-government army situation was indeed very dangerous. On the other hand, there was an even more important personal reason. He wanted to see with his own eyes what kind of person the new leader of the Federation's future was like. This kind of first-hand information was far more important than any kind of intelligence. Seeing Tai Zuan, the middle-aged man wasn't disappointed, but he was somewhat disappointed. He wasn't disappointed because he was sure that this successor of the Tai family wasn't a stupid person. However, this was also the reason why he was disappointed. Moreover, he could see that this person didn't have the slightest bit of sympathy or moral support for the anti-government army. Everything that was presented in the conversation was a naked judgment of benefits. As if he could guess what this second-in-command of the anti-government army was thinking, Tai Zuan slowly said, today, when the Empire is preparing to launch an invasion at any time, the anti-government army is still dividing the hearts of the people of the Federation for those illusory reasons, wasting the Federation's resources, and restricting the military strength of the Federation. In my eyes, you should all be considered traitors. The Bureau of Proclamation shouldn't give you legal status. The middle-aged man thought for a moment, and then said seriously, you and the family behind you are vested interests in the political structure of the Federation. Your opinion might not necessarily be correct. If the Empire really invades, I believe that in terms of resisting the enemy, the soldiers in the mountains will be more respectable than the people of the 4 major military regions of the Federation. There's no need to judge things that haven't happened yet. Tai Zuan said, no words can change the image of the anti-government army in my heart. We have never cared about how the important figures of the Federation view our cause. Perhaps in the distant future, we are destined to be a pair of natural enemies that can't coexist. But at least for now, We can work together, the middle-aged man said. The coexistence of a cat and a mouse might be a very interesting thing. I really want to know who is the cat and who is the mouse. The will of the people cannot be resisted. The 7 major families are deformed existences. No matter how strong they are, there will be a day when they will become a street rat that everyone wants to beat down in front of the tide of history, the middle-aged man said calmly. This is Mr. George Carlin's opinion, and it is to encourage you. I will never deny this, Tai Yuan said, but I always think that you are the big rats of human society. We can still work together if our paths are different, but if we don't agree, there is no need for a deeper conversation. The middle-aged man stood up with a smile and said, If there is any good news, please inform that young man. If there is no good news, I will pour a cup of wine for your friend's friend in the mountains as a memorial. Tai Yuan stood up with a smile, ignoring the psychological attack of the other party. He said, One last question. Where does your confidence come from? Why didn't the Federation catch you after confirming that you left the ball? Just like when you followed Su Lu upstairs to make sure that there was no danger. Information is the source of all power. The middle-aged man bowed elegantly, which didn't match his vulgar temperament. And my ability is a secret. Lai Yuan was silent for a long time before he said, After this short cooperation, I will aim to destroy your armed forces for a longer period of time. But I have to say, in the entire universe, I only admire 5 people, and you are one of them. Today, I am able to negotiate with you for the first time since my coming-of-age ceremony. I have benefited greatly. I am very curious about which 5 people. I wonder if young Master C can satisfy this little vanity of mine. The middle-aged man's eyes lit up, showing just the right amount of curiosity. Other than you, there is that ignorant man by the lake, George Carlin, whose fate is unknown. My distant relative from 8 generations ago, the current director of the Bureau of Proclamation, and the Empire's princess, who is said to have reached Mecha level 6 at the age of 12, Tai Yuan said seriously. In my life, I will work hard for the 5 of you. Oh, human strength is sometimes exhausted. Everyone has their own areas of expertise. For example, in the field of information, I don't believe that there is anyone in this world who is better than me. Of course, this is still my secret. Then there is that old man in Philadelphia. I don't think there is anyone in this world who is stronger than him in terms of individual combat power. Young Master C, don't push yourself too hard. Hard work doesn't necessarily mean that you will achieve it. Tai Yuan smiled and said, Actually, I only hope that in the future, all the outstanding people in the Federation will become my subordinates. The middle-aged man sighed in admiration. Although the son of an aristocratic family is disgusting, this kind of self-confidence is indeed terrifying. The second in command of the anti-government forces appeared in the core area of the Federation just like that, and then quietly left, not even leaving behind a shadow. He only left a clue for the Tai family to follow. However, if the Tai family was willing to accept the conditions of the anti-government forces, that clue would be a secret that the Tai family had to keep. Tai Yuan raised his wrist to look at the time. After silently counting a few times in his mind, he said to Butler Jean beside him, Prepare a secret line. I want to talk to my mother. Butler Jean nodded in agreement. They had already given that person enough time to leave. If he really fell into the hands of the federal military, it would only mean that there would come a day when the legend would lose its luster. He used the identity of Uncle Shi Qinghai. After Butler Jean gave the order to his subordinates, he said softly, Shi Qinghai graduated from University 1 and is a very important young official of the Federation's Investigation Bureau. Who would have thought that he was actually a spy for the anti-government forces? I'm more curious about why the most successful intelligence chief of the 37th constitutional era deliberately left Shi Qinghai for us. Taizan closed his eyes and said, Using the life of a spy as a safety valve to test the sincerity of the family doesn't seem to be in line with that person's usual style of doing things. Keep an eye on Su Lu and Shi Qinghai. Tai Yuan's face was expressionless. Ensure that the former is not harassed. Prepare to contact the latter or arrest him. After leaving the ball, Sulu didn't know that Uncle Shi and Tai Ziuan had a very far-reaching conversation. At this time, he was walking among the snowy trees of the university campus in low spirits. He didn't have the self-awareness of a person involved in history at all. He was just a small figure, but this small figure had indirectly caused a small ripple in the Great Era. Of course, in the current difficult situation, the anti-government forces were willing to temporarily give up the political ideology that they had always believed in. That person even took a huge risk to come to the Federation to negotiate with them personally. Presumably, even if Sulu didn't exist in this world, they would still do everything they could to find Tai Ziyuan. But the problem was, if Sulu didn't exist, then at this ball, it was very likely that Senator Macklin's people or some other forces had beaten them to it. They had persuaded the Tai family and the Tai family's chosen partner, Senator Pabre. A thin layer of snow still accumulated on the grass by the Rose River. It glowed faintly under the moonlight. In his suit, Sulu felt a sliver of cold. He blew on his hands, but wasn't worried that he would catch a cold. Ever since he had started practicing that strange set of movements with the uncle, it seemed that it was very difficult for him to get sick. His gaze shifted from the two moons above his head to the east, and he saw that familiar female apartment building. The plum garden was still there, but Su Li's heart was unusually calm. He knew that Zhang Xiaoming had a secret, but if the other didn't want to tell him, he wouldn't want to investigate further. The inside of his GU suit was filled with cold sweat. After finding out about Tai Ziyuan's shocking identity, Su Li's emotions were very complicated. That conversation from before had made him very nervous. He stubbornly maintained his calm in front of the other just to preserve his little bit of self-esteem. Even if the self-esteem of a small figure was somewhat pitiful in front of a person with special privileges in the Federation. For the time being, he didn't dare to go to Area H1. Although everyone thought that the person inside the Black Mecha was Tai Ziyuan, Sulu still didn't dare to take the risk. At this time, it was already late at night. He suddenly found that he had nowhere to go, but he didn't want to go back to his room in the pear garden. Only now did he understand that after escaping from the Eastwoods district to the capital ring for a year, he was still just a lonely and pitiful fellow. Right at this moment, he suddenly saw that on a remote embankment by the cold Rose River, there was a smear of red that burned like fire in the night. It was flashing incessantly in the cold wind. It was Zouyu in her red suit. There was an orphan girl by the night river. Although Su Lu loathed the character of his Zhou siblings, he still couldn't help but worry when he saw this scene. He walked quietly in the direction of the embankment, afraid that he would startle the other and cause the other to do something crazy. However, before he could get close to the embankment, he saw a very familiar figure dashing out from the frosty grass outside the embankment and pouncing directly on the red suit. In the distance, the sounds of Zouyu struggling, cursing in a low, angry voice, and crying could be heard. Chapter 110. Late Ming Dynasty Painting Scroll, prosperous ending note in the golden spears and armored horses, the same historical event. A completely different late Ming Dynasty teamer. 10 years of chaos at the end of the Ming Dynasty. Book number 1256818 http www. Chidian. Combook 1256818. ASBXBS. There's still a chapter of 4,000 words to be written at around 9 p.m. I'm trying to make up for it. Sure, Qinghai was in a terrible mood. Ever since his boss arrived in Linhai, his mood had never improved. As a professional, he had been a spy within the Federation for so many years. He had always carefully hidden his identity and completed many missions assigned by the organization. He did feel very tired, but sometimes when he thought about it, he would feel proud. However, he never thought that after working so hard within the Federation for so long, he would have to face such a dangerous situation because of the organization's sudden idea. Regardless of the outcome of the negotiations between the anti-government forces and the Crown Prince, Shi Qinghai knew that his identity could no longer be hidden. Even if the Federation temporarily ignored him, after this incident, the Tai family would definitely not care about his life. If he was arrested by the Federation, what awaited him would be a life sentence. Sure, Qinghai knew that there was no light in front of him. He could only wait and see when the darkness would come. He had thought about leaving, but in the Federation, where could he go? Unless he returned to S2's Huanshan Sizhou. However, the organization did not give him an order to leave. If he returned without an order, it would be no different from betraying the organization. In the anti-government forces cause, people like him were just pawns that could be sacrificed at any time. No one cared about their safety. This fact made him feel very bad. His handsome face was full of gloomy lines. He sat by the Rose River embankment, waiting for the final judgment to come. In the end, he did not expect to see the scene of a girl in a red dress jumping into the river. He pushed Zhou Yu to the ground. Looking at this woman's cold eyes, beautiful face, and extremely cruel expression towards others and herself, Shi Qinghai did not know why he felt extremely angry. He said in a low voice, "I really don't know if you have a brain. It's just a little boy who didn't choose you to be his bed partner. Do you have to live or die?" Zhou Yu, who was pushed to the ground, stared at Shi Qinghai's hateful face. She suddenly struggled and roared like an angry lioness. "It's all your fault. It's all your fault." Zhou Yu was not sure if she liked the Crown Prince brother, because in these 2 years, she had only seen him twice. But in these years, everything seemed to convince her that she should like Tai Ziyuan. She had to like Tai Ziyuan. However, today's Double Moon Festival Ball made everything disappear. Thinking of the noble lady who had always been generous with her love for her, and thinking of all these years of waiting, she felt cold in her heart. It seemed that there was nothing worth cherishing anymore. So she left her friends, left the ball, and came to the quiet Rose River embankment. Perhaps she just wanted to commemorate her past in the cold moon, but she did not expect to attract a hungry wolf. Sure, Qinghai was a very delicate guy, but he was very strong. Zhou Yu, whose wrist was held by him, could not get up no matter how hard she struggled. Sure, Qinghai felt the soft body under him. At the moment when he was ready to die, he suddenly felt a trace of excitement that he had not felt for a long time. After being a playboy for many years, he seemed to have become numb to women. But today, on the grass, looking at Zhou Yu's helpless and beautiful face, he gradually had a reaction. In the cold night, this pair of hostile men and women, because of their different experiences, had the same feelings of disappointment and sadness. They rolled on the grass and stared at each other fiercely. Zhou Yu found that she was not as strong as this man. After looking at him quietly for a moment, she exerted strength in her waist and abdomen and bit Shi Qinghai's palm. Shi Qinghai's handsome face twisted, and the back of his hand suddenly bled. He was angry and slapped Zhou Yu's head. He scolded, "Do you think I really have tender feelings for women?" Zhou Yu looked at him coldly and said, "Either you kill me today, or you wait to be killed. Once is enough for this kind of threat." Shi Qinghai stared at the fierceness on the woman's face and suddenly felt very excited. He said in a low voice, "Don't forget how I treated you when you threatened me in the garden." The wound on Shi Qinghai's thin lips proved that the scene in the garden after the ball was erotic and intense. The young man and woman on the thin, snowy grass seemed to have thought of that scene at the same time. Some strange emotions appeared in their eyes, and almost at the same time, they made the same move and kissed each other fiercely. Su Lu stood at the edge of the woods and stared blankly at the scene by the river embankment. He could not understand how the story had developed into such an erotic scene. He thought that Mr. Shi was indeed a hooligan, and that Zhou Yu was indeed a psychopath. He had infinite admiration for them. There was nothing for him to do, and he did not know where to go. He scratched his head and walked to the iron gate of the pear garden. At around 11 o'clock the next day, an automatic alarm rang in a room in an apartment building in Linhai. Shi Qinghai immediately opened his eyes. Although in the hearts of all his colleagues, he was an extremely lazy and depraved playboy, but the good habits of spy always played a role in certain details. Avoiding the scattered wine bottles under the bed, Shi Qinghai walked into the bathroom. After quickly washing up and dressing up, he made himself a very nutritious breakfast and began to read today's electronic newspaper. After reading the newspaper, he threw the plates into the sink and walked back to the bedroom. He began to stare blankly at the women on the bed who were still in a deep sleep. Outside the window, it was already cold and snowy, but inside the window, it was as warm as spring. The woman on the bed was completely naked. Her red dress was thrown on the corner of the bed, and the thin red silk quilt was carelessly draped over her, revealing her smooth, jade-like back and the shocking curves of her waist and hips. The woman was sleeping with her face facing the window, and only her graceful back was exposed to Shi Qinghai. Her jade-like skin contrasted with the red silk quilt made her look particularly attractive. Half of her plump but was covered, and her slender, smooth thighs were completely covered. Only the faint lines could be seen, which added to her seductiveness. Shi Qinghai had forgotten how much wine he drank last night. He did not know how many one-night stands he had in his life. But quietly looking at the woman on the bed, looking at her full of seductive curves and her naturally wavy hair, there was a strange feeling in his heart. If it were not for the constant fear of being arrested by the Federation, he might never have had sex with such a troublesome person, especially when he was very clear about this woman's background and her coldness. "Don't pretend to be asleep," Shi Qinghai said indifferently. "I have to go to work today." Zhou lazily turned over on the bed, her eyes still closed. The remnants of makeup between her eyebrows were not ugly, but instead gave off a beautiful feeling like a red flower after the rain. She subconsciously pulled up the thin, red quilt to cover her chest, then slowly opened her eyes and asked, "What time is it?" 11 o'clock. Hearing Zhou's somewhat hoarse voice, Shi Qinghai, the playboy, actually felt a little shaken. He thought of the madness last night, and the woman on the bed who seemed to be lewd, but was actually a little inexperienced. At the beginning, it was hard, but at the end, it was a river. Zhou sat up on the bed, turned around, and began to put on her clothes. She slightly lowered her head and said indifferently, "Don't let anyone know what happened last night." "I think so too," Shi Qinghai said calmly. Zhou's back slightly stiffened. After a moment, she said, "Don't say you know me in the future. That's what I think too." Shi Qinghai's reply was still as calm and cold as ever. Zhou put on her clothes and walked to the door of the apartment. Then, without any warning, she burst into tears. Her tears washed over her face like rainwater, turning the remnants of the makeup into a field of flowers. A field of flowers. Shi Qinghai looked at her quietly. He knew that this woman was not crying because of his attitude. Maybe she was crying because of something that she herself did not fully understand. He knew that Zhou was really crying, heartbreakingly, desperately, crying for the past, crying for the past, crying for herself, crying for others. This rogue official of the Investigation Bureau of the Federation knew women very well. Even when women were crying, they would care very much about whether they looked good or not. Only when they really treated themselves like a broken pot would they grimace, with snot bubbles coming out of their noses, and contort their facial features in pain, just like Zhou at this moment. "Don't cry. I'm about to die, but I didn't cry. What do you have to cry for?" Shi Qinghai's expression was particularly gloomy. At this moment, the intercom in the apartment rang. Shi Qinghai picked it up and noticed that the red light was coming from the intercom. This meant that it was a secret call from an unknown line, and that it had gone beyond the legal monitoring of the Investigation Bureau. After a moment of silence, he picked up the phone. Then, he heard a strange voice. "The initial plan has been reached. We need more details." After this sentence, the phone was abruptly cut off. Shi Qinghai's expression became more and more solemn. At this time, he still did not know the details and results of the negotiation between the middle-aged man and the crown prince last night. However, this phone call indicated that the negotiation seemed to have been successful and that he did not have to start running away immediately. The work began. Shi Qinghai put down the phone and took a deep breath. When he turned around, he found that the girl in red had already disappeared. "I'll be very busy these days." Su Lu listened to the voice on the other side of the phone quietly. He did not answer, but listened very carefully to Shi Qinghai's words. "You know that I'm an official of the Investigation Bureau, and I often have to carry out some shady missions. So, maybe one day I'll disappear." Shi Qinghai said casually on the other side of the phone. If one day I really disappear, don't worry too much and don't try to find me. His voice was relaxed, but Su Lu smelled a trace of an inauspicious sign. He wanted to ask, but from his friend's tone, he could tell that it was impossible for him to tell the truth. The problem now is that my missions are all secret. If I disappear, maybe the investigation bureau will investigate you. Sure, Qinghai's voice on the other side of the phone became extremely serious. Just tell the truth. Don't try to hide anything in front of those professionals. You can't hide anything from them. Besides, we're just ordinary friends. They should be able to find out the truth. I don't know how you know Tai Ziwan, and there's no need to know now. I just want to remind you that if you run into big trouble after I disappear, you could try to mention his name. I believe there shouldn't be too much of a problem. Su Lu had been quietly listening to Shi Qinghai's instructions, but at this time, he couldn't help but ask, no matter how secret a mission is, there will be a day when it's completed. If your disappearance means that you won't come back, I hope you can still let me know. After all, I don't have many friends in the Federation. Shi Qinghai paused for a moment on the other side of the phone, then said, I'll try my best. Su Lu held the phone tightly, squinted his eyes out of habit, and said seriously, no matter what kind of trouble you're in, I hope you can take care of yourself. After this phone call, Shi Qinghai disappeared from Su Li's life. After a few days, Su Lu even went to the Linhai field office to look for him. In the end, the members of the 4 departments said that Section Chief Shi had taken a 2-month-long leave. No one knew where he was going. Su Lu couldn't help but worry. But in the situation where he couldn't contact him, there was nothing he could do. The mysterious Tai Ziyuan also disappeared with Shi Qinghai. Su Lu took the risk to enter the H1 area one night, but he didn't find the coffee in the lounge. However, he confirmed that Tai Ziyuan should still be on campus, but he seemed to be busy with something. For a moment, Su Lu was extremely dissatisfied with his life. It was rare for him to have 2 or 3 friends, but all of them seemed to come and go like ghosts, mysteriously disappearing just like that. He thought to himself in annoyance, could it be that in this world, there was someone more mysterious than him? After the late autumn came the cold winter. Heavy snow piled up on the streets of Linhai University. The biting cold wind made most of the students choose distance learning instead of leaving the apartment to listen to the professor's lectures. Su Lu still walked through the pear garden, wearing the green military windbreaker that Mrs. Zhong gave him. He braved the wind and snow, silently studying and silently living his life. The aftermath of the Double Moon Festival dance party had already dissipated, and the students on the road pointed at Su Lu had already disappeared. The only interlude was that the son of the Sun family, who had his front teeth knocked out by Su Lu, sent a gift to express his intention to reconcile. It was also through this detail that Su Lu understood that the heir of the Tai family was indeed an existence that was infinitely revered in certain circles in the Federation. Chapter 111. Su Li's hand that was holding the phone froze for a moment. Then he simply said, okay. He put the phone away and came back to his senses. It had been more than 20 days since the ball, and he hadn't seen Zhang Xiaoming for more than 20 days. He looked at his class schedule and realized that the next day was the last day of December. Of course, there were no classes. He realized that the peace and solitude had lasted for so long that he had forgotten about the arrival of the new year. At this time, Zhang Xiaoming was in a daze in her single apartment. She glanced at the black-rimmed glasses by her hand, and her delicate face showed a trace of distress and struggle. After the Double Moon Festival ball, Tai Ziwan disappeared again, and she couldn't find any opportunity to get close to that person. The failure of this mission didn't make Senator Macklin unhappy. On the contrary, the fatherly elder comforted her and told her to be careful and hide her identity. At the same time, he secretly pointed out that since the male student named Su Lu met Tai Ziyuan by chance, perhaps there would be a good result if she set out from there. Should she use Su Lu to get close to that person? Zhang Xiaoming's long eyelashes fluttered twice, and she immediately rejected this idea. She didn't want to hurt that man again after hurting him. On the last day of the 66th year of the 37th Constitution, The Federation was immersed in the atmosphere of celebrating the new year. Although the Empire, which was light years away and across the galaxy from the West Woods, was still a shadow in the hearts of the Federation citizens, the front lines were too far away, and everyone subconsciously didn't think about that problem. The people of the Federation cast their anxious gazes toward the S2 region. After the election in the S2 region, surrounded by the mountains, the Federation government's accusations against the opposition members intensified, accusing them of not really laying down their weapons. The federal military also began to step up its preparations for war. The outbreak of the Civil War once again seemed to be inevitable. Senator Medellin, who was born in the anti-government army, had successfully been elected as a member of the new Federation Management Committee. He had truly entered the core political area of the Federation. However, no matter how loudly he shouted in various meetings in the Capital Special District, he could not really eliminate the danger of civil war. This was because everyone knew that Senator Macklin could influence the people in the 4 states, but he could not influence the anti-government armed forces in the mountains. After years of embargoes and economic sanctions by the Federation, the anti-government forces in the mountains were on the brink of collapse. They could not just wait to be suppressed by the Federal Army. They would definitely choose some kind of counterattack. Although there were so many worries for the ordinary citizens of the Federation, life had to go on. These questions about politics and life and death could only make them sigh and lament when they read the electronic newspaper. On New Year's Eve, all the famous restaurants were fully booked, and the neon lights of the amusement park began to shine in the daytime, creating a peaceful and happy scene. Family members and lovers who had holidays occupied the large Ferris wheel and the special restaurants in the world of ice and snow. Compared to the liveliness, the towering Iron Tower in Linhai had lost its charm as a tourist attraction and became incomparably quiet. This was because not many people were willing to run to the top of the Iron Tower in such a cold winter. Sulu didn't take the elevator. Instead, he carried his backpack and climbed up the Iron Tower step by step. His face was slightly red, and beads of sweat seeped out from his hair. However, his breathing was still steady, and he didn't feel tired at all. Today, he could already train his nerves and muscles in his daily life, making the mysterious power in his body more and more peaceful, and also more and more powerful. The cold wind whistled on the sightseeing floor of the Iron Tower. The orange-colored lights were pulled into lonely lines, nestled on the cold metal body. There was no one, only a girl in a dark brown windbreaker by the railing in the distance. She was holding her chin and looking at the city scenery of Linhai in a daze. She wore a cute velvet hat and pink gloves. Her long eyelashes blinked in the cold wind, but as if she did not feel the cold, she just quietly looked outside the railing. Sulu was a dozen meters behind her, quietly looking at her, somewhat lost in thought. They had not seen each other for a few days, but when they met again, his state of mind returned to the original situation, incomparably calm and happy. "You're here." Zhang Xiaoming turned around and smiled at him. Sulu walked up and gently smiled. He took off the backpack on his back and threw it at her feet. Standing beside her, he followed her gaze and looked outside the railing. He saw a few clouds floating in the snowless sky, and on the roofs of the buildings in Linhai, there were traces of ice and snow left from this winter. The whole city was in a New Year's atmosphere, but he still felt a little lonely. "The scenery here is not very good." Sulu imagined the girl's mood when she looked here and said, "Why did you want to meet here?" "When I was young, my parents were very busy with work, and I didn't want to sit in those small rooms on the Ferris wheel. So I like to come here to see the scenery by myself." Zhang Xiaoming exhaled a mouthful of fog and stared blankly at the shadow of the Ferris wheel in the distance. She said, "That day at the ball, I refused to dance with you. I hope you don't mind. I said that day, I don't know how to dance." Sulu still narrowed his eyes and looked at the gray sky. He said, "If you still want to say sorry today, I think it's meaningless. Although I have never been in love, I know there is no right or wrong in this kind of thing. You've changed a bit." Zhang Xiaoming suddenly turned her head to look at him and laughed. "That time in front of the teaching building, you were much more eloquent than you are now." Sulu also thought of that conversation and said with a smile, "Back then, I saw things too simply." He turned his head and quietly looked at the light flowing in Zhang Xiaoming's eyes. He noticed that she was not wearing her black-rimmed glasses today. He said softly, "Until today, I still think things are very simple. It's just that, other than me, people in this world always have a habit of making simple things very complicated." Zhang Xiaoming did not expect to hear this. She lowered her eyes and fell into deep thought. After a long time, she said softly, "Maybe it's because I'm a very complicated person, and you're a very simple person. No, you're a very simple person, but you want to do very complicated things." Su Li's hand was holding the railing, and he felt that the railing was as cold as ice. He withdrew his hand and exhaled. He asked, "What is your secret?" Zhang Xiaoming was silent for a long time. She said, "A year ago, I was doing voluntary support work in the office of Senator Medellin in S2. I know that. There are many young people in the Federation who go to the 4 states to do this kind of work." Su Lu said, "You are back, and the government has determined that you are a returnee. This shouldn't be a problem. The problem is, until today, I am still working for Senator Medellin." Zhang Xiaoming suddenly smiled, but her smile was cold. After hearing Zhang Xiaoming's true identity, Su Lu fell silent. After a long time, he said softly, "And then, although I have not received professional espionage training, what I do is actually not much different from a spy." Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head and looked at the heavy backpack by her feet. She said, "I came back to Yue University for only one purpose, and that is to get close to Tai Ziyuan and help the senator establish some kind of direct connection with him." And then, Zhang Xiaoming looked at him with slight surprise. She continued, "Other than the Double Moon Festival Ball, I have no other way to get close to the mysterious heir of the Tai family." "Oh, right, you might not know his true identity yet." Sulu shook his head and stopped this question. He asked calmly, and then, no matter what Zhang Xiaoming said, Sulu only replied with 3 words, "And then?" Zhang Xiaoming looked at him quietly. She took off a pink cotton glove from her hand and put it on his hand. She lowered her head and said softly, "You don't seem surprised at all, and you don't seem angry. Actually, the number of strange things I've encountered in my life is more than you can imagine." Su Lu put on the glove on his left hand, and his right hand naturally held her hand. He looked at her and said seriously, "I just don't understand what these things have to do with what happened between us. I'm a spy." Zhang Xiaoming looked at him seriously. She didn't understand and said, "Are you not afraid at all?" Su Lu muttered a few words in annoyance. He thought to himself, "I'm still a fugitive." He sighed and shook his head. He gently parted Zhang Xiaoming's hair under her cap. He looked at her smooth forehead and said with pity, "If this is your secret, I guessed it a long time ago, but I didn't think that the truth I guessed was the truth." Zhang Xiaoming laughed bitterly. She turned her head and looked at the sky outside the railings. She said, "I know I hurt you, and I shouldn't have said these things. But if I don't explain it to you, I will feel very bad. You wanted to get close to Tai Ziyuan, so you left me." Sula helped her organize the messy information. After a moment of silence, he said, "And now you realize that I know Tai Ziyuan. If you wanted to get close to him, it would have been more convenient for you to stay by my side. You didn't look for me for so many days. It is clear that you don't want to look back. If I were to return to you under these circumstances, it would be an insult to both of us." Zhang Xiaoming let go of his hand and held her face. Her face was full of relief and determination. "I won't let myself do such a thing." Su Li's mood was slightly better. "You once asked me what I thought of George Carlin's theory and the people in S2. I once said that I sympathized with them and was willing to support them, but I don't understand. Is it because you're willing to sacrifice something, you can sacrifice the love between us?" Zhang Xiaoming's nose wrinkled in distress. She sighed and said, "Maybe you think it is funny, but it is my belief, and I will definitely return to S2 in the future. Your dream is to be the chief engineer of the Shell Motor Company. The two of us don't have a future to begin with. Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about the present. You are here today. It seems that the people you serve have new requirements for you." Su Li's eyes narrowed. He said mockingly, I respect any belief, but a belief that requires one to sacrifice one's feelings and betray one's feelings. In my opinion, it is a disgusting thing. Zhang Xiaoming felt his anger. She silently changed the topic. The pressure on S2 is too great. The soldiers and workers living in the mountains are about to be attacked by the federal military. And the only ones who can change the will of the Federation government are those big families. Tai Yuan is the heir of the Tai family, one of the 7 big families. If Senator Macklin can gain his trust, he will be able to help the people in the mountains get through these difficult times. In your opinion, I betrayed the feelings between us for some illusory belief. But in reality, I'm doing this for the sake of those fresh lives. After a long silence, Su Lu said, I haven't seen Tai Yuan for many days. I may not be able to help you on your side. I just want to confess everything to you. Zhang Xiaoming looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears. Su Lu took her into his arms. His hands slipped in her brown windbreaker, sticking close to her soft and warm body. He hugged her tightly and refused to let go. He sniffed the faint fragrance around her neck and said, You are my first woman. Zhang Xiaoming leaned into his arms and said, You are my first man. I like you. I like you too. Are you really going to leave me? Yes. Then what is it between us? What was that night? Was it charity for a poor man like me before he died? Su Li's voice suddenly became angry. Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head and held his chin like a kitten. She said faintly, Just think of it as charity for me. Maybe then you won't be so unhappy. Have you ever thought that those big shots who play politics are just using you? Have you ever thought that you're just a girl who doesn't know anything? You're very childish. Su Lu stood up straight, forgetting that she was still a young girl who wasn't even 20 yet. She looked into Zhang Xiaoming's eyes with melancholy. Zhang Xiaoming smiled, but tears began to flash in her eyes. Her nasal voice was very strong. She said with a sniffling voice, I am still young. I have to be childish while I can. At this moment, Su Lu knew that he couldn't persuade her to leave that strange world. He vaguely understood the philosophy and thoughts of some people in this world. At this moment, he began to understand this girl's stubbornness and began to feel this sadness that came early. Chapter 112. After the fireworks bloomed, Su Lu and Zhang Xiaoming walked down the Iron Tower. The stairs were so long, but the two of them hoped it would be longer. Just as the New Year bell rang, they warmed each other and held hands like a real couple. They strolled along the bustling streets of Linhai, not thinking or thinking about anything. When they walked in front of the big holographic screen at the intersection of the city center with freshly baked bread in hand, it was the last-minute countdown of the 66th year of the constitutional calendar. There was a sea of people at the intersection of the street. Young people with excited and praying expressions were watching the constantly changing numbers on the holographic screen. Su Lu smiled. He glanced at Zhang Xiaoming in his arms and said, See, actually, most people's lives are normal and full like this. The crowd was crowded, and the chill of winter was forced back. Zhang Xiaoming, whose cheeks were slightly red, took off her hat and said, But we can't always just look at the surface. The two of them were silent in the sea of people, quietly cuddling together. It was strange to say that this young man and woman were used to being silent in front of others. Only when they were together did they seem to have more words and expressions. 10, 9, 8, 7. As the numbers on the huge screen changed, the people in the square at the crossroads began to loudly count down. Their voices became louder and louder, more and more orderly, shaking the two bright moons in the sky. 3, 2, 1. The numbers finally reached 0, and the 66th year of the constitutional era took its last step. The second hand of a new year welcomed the cheers of countless people and ribbons in the square. Happy New Year! Happy New Year, 67. People happily waved the scarves and hats in their hands and blew the trumpets to add noise to the New Year's atmosphere. Their companions began to hug each other, and the young men took advantage of the New Year's atmosphere to bravely hug the girls they didn't know. Zhang Xiaoming held back her laughter as she was dragged away by Su Lu away from this noisy and dangerous area. At certain moments, the possessiveness and jealousy displayed by young men would be extremely cute, making a girl's heart feel sweet. However, that trace of sweetness turned into calmness and disappointment in an instant. She looked at Sulu and said, "My mission has failed, so it's also over. There's no meaning in staying in UA University anymore. I'll probably return to S2 the day after tomorrow." Sulu remained silent. He didn't say anything like waiting for her. After this parting, he didn't know when they would meet again. He also didn't try to keep her. The situation in the 4 prefectures was too critical. She had to return to the place she missed and fight with those strangers. "Be careful." He lowered his head and put the glove back on her hand. He gently held it and then gave her a New Year's hug. Suddenly, his gaze moved from Zhang Xiaoming's shoulder to the hologram screen in confusion. This was because he discovered that the face of Jian Shu, who was doing the New Year's greeting on the Federation TV station, had suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a very familiar news anchor. At the same time, Sulu wasn't the only one who noticed the change in the hologram screen. The people in the square at the end of the street also looked at the hologram screen in confusion. The female news anchor's expression was slightly flustered. She said, "Now, we'll broadcast a piece of news that our station has just received." After saying this, the good news anchor immediately calmed down. "A piece of news from a reliable source has confirmed the Federation TV station's news often had a break in breaking news, but on this special occasion of the new year, it was undoubtedly a very important thing to do." The people in the square at the end of the street quieted down. They looked at the huge hologram screen with a trace of uneasiness and listened to the female news anchor's voice in the air. The female news anchor's voice was a bit hurried, but there was an unconcealable joy between her eyebrows. The people in the Federation who were watching this news immediately felt relieved. It seemed that the president was not assassinated, nor was it the Empire taking advantage of the Federation's new year to launch a brazen invasion. Then what kind of good news would make the Federation TV station's director make the decision to break in the broadcast at the first possible moment? Just half an hour ago, the Federation Management Committee member Mr. Pabre's transport plane has landed at the Green Dragon Mountain Airport in Region S2. The Green Dragon Mountain Airport is the only air passage between Green Dragon Mountain and the outside world. Currently, it is still under the control of the anti-government forces. The following is the image that our station has just received. The people in the square at the end of the street looked at the hologram screen in disbelief. They saw a tall man wearing a gray windbreaker under the protection of several aides, walking down the gangway of a shabby transport plane. And below the transport plane, several leaders of the anti-government forces greeted him with a serious expression. The tall man's face was a bit dark. The lines of his face were as sharp as a knife, showing this person's resolute character. His lips were a bit thick. He was the rising political star of the Federation in the past 2 years, Member Pabre, who was deeply supported by the majority of the middle and lower class people. In the news image on the hologram screen, Member Pabre's broad right hand and the hand of the leader of the anti-government forces were tightly clasped together. At the same time, the Federation TV station's news anchor's voiceover continued to sound. "We don't know when Member Pabre left the Capital Special District and went to the Green Dragon Mountain military area, but according to the press release sent by the member's office, Member Pabre's trip was invited by the anti-government forces leader Nan Shui to negotiate a settlement agreement. According to the latest news, the two sides have reached an agreement on the specific details of the agreement. Within the next 48 hours, the anti-government forces will fully withdraw from the 4 states around the mountain, maintaining an effective zone of peace between them and the government forces. Member Pabre's office has publicly called for the government and the military to maintain a restrained attitude before the settlement agreement is signed. At the same time, they said that the specific provisions of the settlement agreement will be sent to the Management Committee and the President's office in the shortest time possible. Member Pabre believes that this settlement agreement will certainly satisfy the dignity and demands of all parties. According to our station's reporters in the 4 states, before 8 o'clock last night, the anti-government forces had already begun to withdraw, but no one expected that this was to welcome Member Pabre's sudden visit. According to analysts, the reason why Member Pabre's office showed such confidence in the press release is because the member has already obtained some kind of promise from the leader of the anti-government forces, Nan Shui. The anti-government forces will make great concessions in the negotiations and accept the 3 key conditions put forward by the government. The crowd in the square at the end of the street, who had been quietly listening to the news, finally burst into cheers at this time. Whether it was from the news or from Member Medellin's busy lobbying activities, the people of the Federation guessed that the military operation in Region S2 was about to begin and that a civil war was about to break out. This fact cast a shadow over the new year. However, just after the new year, Member Pabre, who took the risk to travel to the anti-government forces area on a transport plane, brought such a big surprise to the people that they couldn't help but cheer. The president's press release has just responded by welcoming the peaceful intentions shown by the anti-government forces at the arrival of the new year. At the same time, they are grateful to Member Pabre for his tireless efforts for peace, and are grateful to Member Pabre for taking the risk to personally travel to the mountain area. However, the press release also said that Mr. President is temporarily unable to understand the specific contents of the agreement, so he is unable to make a specific evaluation. The Management Committee has temporarily maintained silence. A liaison officer of the member's office, who is willing to be named, expressed doubts about the true purpose of Member Pabre's trip. He also insisted that the action without the authorization of the President and the Management Committee is not legal, and that the legendary reconciliation agreement actually has no legal effect. The crowd in the square let out a series of extremely harsh boos. At this time, if the Federation Management Committee dared to pour cold water on this hard-won peace process, it would only cause the dissatisfaction of all the people of the Federation. The official dared not reveal his identity. It was obvious that he was a member who was unwilling to serve him. In the next election, he would be mercilessly abandoned by the angry people. The news footage on the hologram changed to the image of the withdrawal of the anti-government forces that the television station had just received. The anti-government forces wearing dark military uniforms were methodically sitting in armored vehicles along the rugged mountain road and retreating into the deep mountains and forests. Immediately after, the news anchor's voice sounded again. The Ministry of Defense still has not officially responded. According to analysts, the federal military has been preparing for the spring offensive for as long as 2 years. It is impossible for them to slow down the pace of preparation for war because of the reconciliation agreement reached by Member Pabre alone with the anti-government forces. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense, citing that today is a public holiday, rejected our request for an interview. When she said this, the female anchor's expression was very serious, but her voice deliberately paused. It was obvious that she wanted to use the ridiculous excuse of the Ministry of Defense to be booed by all the people of the Federation. General Zhou Yingxing, the Deputy Director of Logistics of the Ministry of Defense, said in his personal capacity during an interview with our station, "As a loyal soldier of the Federation, he will firmly carry out every order of Mr. President and the Management Committee. However, he is more willing to let the mechas and bullets of the Federal Army pour down on the land of the Empire people. He is very optimistic about the future prospects of this reconciliation agreement. All the signs show that Senator Prabble's adventure has already borne a lot of fruit. Peace may come, but civil war may not start." The female anchor on the hologram looked at the camera and said with a smile, "Without a doubt, this is the best New Year's gift that Member Pabre has given to all the people of the Federation in the 67th year of the constitutional calendar." Hearing the cheers around him and hearing the voice of Member Pabre, Su Lu retracted his gaze from the hologram. He couldn't believe his ears and laughed happily. He looked at Zhang Xiaoming beside him and said, "It looks like you don't have to rush back." Zhang Xiaoming looked at the images on the hologram in disbelief. She asked in surprise and doubt, "Why wasn't there any news beforehand?" The member of parliament doesn't seem to know either. Right at this moment, Su Li's phone rang. A familiar voice that he hadn't heard for a long time came from the other end of the phone. That voice was full of fatigue and faint satisfaction. My work is done. Where are you? Have a drink with me. Chapter 113. The bar was full of people celebrating the new year. Stimulated by the alcohol and the good news that had just been broadcasted on the news, people were talking loudly about something and toasting people they didn't know. Sulu struggled to walk to a quiet corner of the bar. When he saw the 2 empty bottles of hard liquor in front of Shi Qinghai, he couldn't help but shake his head. Shi Qinghai was still wearing his wrinkled suit, and his whole body was emitting a sour smell. There was nothing on the table except for a few bottles of amber hard liquor, 2 wine glasses, and a bucket of ice. Zhang Xiaoming didn't come with you? Shi Qinghai lazily opened his eyes. Although he had already downed 2 bottles of hard liquor, the eyes of this yuppie-looking official from the Bureau of Investigation were still clear and bright, without a trace of drunkenness. Sulu admired Shi Qinghai's alcohol tolerance the most. He sighed and poured himself a thin layer of alcohol, but added 7 ice cubes. He replied, she had a party at home today, so she went back first. In fact, Zhang Xiaoming didn't want to go back to that stale home where she only knew how to socialize in high society. However, she had confessed to Su Lu that she was a spy, so naturally, Su Lu wouldn't bring her to meet Shi Qinghai. After all, Shi Qinghai was an official from the Bureau of Investigation of the Federation. Thinking of Zhang Xiaoming, Su Li's expression gradually froze. He couldn't completely understand what was on the girl's mind. We haven't seen each other for a few days. Why did that woman come back to you? Shi Qinghai saw his expression and frowned. When he found out that Zhang Xiaoming and Su Lu were together over the phone, he immediately guessed that it was related to Senator Macklin. Thinking that the female student might want to get close to Tai Ziyuan by returning to Su Lu, he couldn't hide the disgust in his heart. He said coldly, "Did you forget what happened before the ball?" Su Lu smiled honestly. Although he couldn't guess what Shi Qinghai was worried about, he could tell that he was concerned about him. He avoided the question and said, "Let's talk about you. What kind of secret mission made you leave for so long? I went to the 4th Department to look for you, but even your staff members didn't know where you were." Well, since it's a secret mission, of course those little bastards wouldn't know. Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and said proudly, "Nominally, I just took a 2-month leave and went to the tropical south for a vacation. Since that's the case, of course, you can't tell me about the mission," Su Lu said. Shi Qinghai shrugged and silently agreed. He lay on the sofa comfortably and drank while watching the TV in the bar. The TV screen was still repeating the breaking news. On the screen, Counselor Pavel looked very calm as he walked up the gangway. The wind in the S2 Green Dragon Mountain area made his windbreaker flutter in the wind. Shi Qinghai looked at the screen and pursed his thin lips. He narrowed his eyes and fell into deep thought. In the past few days, he had been very busy. The communication between the Tai family and the anti-government army was all done by him alone. He had to negotiate the conditions, send the information back and forth, and clash of wills. It was very tiring for him. The second in command of the anti-government army had left Linhai a long time ago, so he had to do everything by himself. He used a secret channel and devoted himself to this shocking behind-the-scenes deal. Not only did he have to avoid the attention of the Federation government, but he also had to avoid the surveillance of the Tai family. The pressure was as heavy as a mountain. It was so heavy that he almost couldn't breathe, and he didn't even have time to take a shower. Now that everything was over, and both parties had reached an agreement, the past few days of hard work and tension seemed to have exchanged for a good result. Looking at Senator Pabre, whose face was as dark as iron, on the screen, he suddenly felt a little exhausted. Did you know? This guy who looks like a rock on the screen will become our president next year. Shi Qinghai put down his wine glass and lit a cigarette. He took a deep breath and sighed in satisfaction. He bitterly added in his heart, "At least before this guy is officially elected president, I should be safe in the Federation." Looking at Senator Pabre shaking hands with the leader of the anti-government army on the screen, Shi Qinghai was amazed by the influence of the Tai family in the Federation. Choosing to make Pabre appear in front of all the Federation citizens during the new year in the form of a breaking news event, it had to be said that this was a way to maximize the benefits. But the key was that the Thai family had to have this kind of control over the media, as well as the ability to judge the countless factions within the Federation government. Only then could this news event catch everyone off guard. If the citizens of the Federation could really get rid of the shadow of the Civil War, then they would definitely remember for a very long time that when everyone was celebrating the new year, a distinguished senator of the Federation took a great risk and secretly went to the mountainous area controlled by the anti-government army and reached a peace agreement with the anti-government army. From today onwards, it would be very difficult for people to forget the moment when Senator Pabre, wearing a trench coat, walked down the gangway of the transport aircraft with a calm expression. "It's this year." Sulu reminded Shi Qinghai that it was already past 12 o'clock. He shook his head and said, "Although I also like Senator Pabre very much, the political aspect is too far away from us. I don't know if he can successfully get elected. Trust me, he is already the president." Shi Qinghai smiled a little tiredly. He thought to himself that if Senator Pabre still couldn't grasp this opportunity under such a wave of public opinion, then it could only mean that the higher-ups in the organization and the Thai family had all misjudged him at the same time. At the same time, he also thought that the ordinary citizens of the Federation only saw this scene on the news today, but they didn't know that in order for this to happen on time on the new year, the two parties involved in this incident had secretly negotiated many times. In the end, they were able to sign the agreement in the end. The ordinary citizens also didn't know how much inside information was hidden behind this seemingly legendary senator's journey of reconciliation. Shi Qinghai knew all of these inside information because he was the person involved. He quietly looked at Sulu and thought about the conversation at the Double Moon Festival Ball. He thought about how his good friend in front of him would probably never know about the important role he played in this incident, and he couldn't help but smile slightly. After stuffing out the cigarette, Shi Qinghai raised his wine glass and said to Sulu, "To the peace of the Federation." Sulu raised his wine glass and replied with a smile, "To our future president." Shi Qinghai downed the strong wine in one gulp, and a strange smile appeared on his face. "Yes, to our president." The busy workers had already left, and the light screen connected by the optical fiber had also been dismantled and was ready to be transported away. Tai Yuan stood on the second floor and looked down at the empty hall, but it was as if he could still see the computer light screen that displayed the important information of the major forces of the Federation and the workers who were responsible for determining the specific links and analyzing the reactions of all parties after the incident. This was a villa on the outskirts of Linhai, and it was the property of the Thai family. In the past few days, this villa had become a temporary decision-making room, specifically responsible for dealing with the negotiations with the S2 anti-government army. In the past few days, the light screen was always on, and the workers were always busy, walking as if they were running. Tai Yuan's lips slightly curved, and he smiled. After the coming-of-age ceremony, he finally had full authority. For the first time, he truly began to independently handle a major event that could affect the entire Federation. Under the close supervision of Lady Tai, with the help of countless workers from the family, and after many days of exhaustion, he was finally satisfied to see that his work had a good result. He only saw the news on a light screen once, but he saw the news 4 minutes before anyone in the Federation, and even the president. This was because this piece of news had passed his review and was sent to the news department of the federal television station. The Federation TV station was the national TV station, and no company, no tycoon, not even the legendary 7 families had the ability to completely control it. But countless forces would try to reach out their hands in the Federation TV station. And the Thai family, who had always been low-key and steady, was the most important news department of the Federation TV station and had the most powerful influence. Tai Yuan held the railing with both hands and recalled the scene in his mind. He was very satisfied with Mr. Pabre's performance in front of the camera. He believed that in the near future, Mr. Pabre's campaign office would definitely choose that scene as the most important poster cover and paste it all over the Federation streets to win him countless votes. Thinking about this, the youth couldn't help but smile, and he was very satisfied with his work these past few days. The negotiations with the anti-government forces were exceptionally difficult because the other party was still unwilling to give in to the three most important conditions proposed by the Federation government. And if Tai Ziyuan couldn't convince the other party to give in, then even if he reluctantly signed the agreement, he was afraid that in front of the president and the management committee, he wouldn't be able to get a shred of approval. The negotiations continued until the last moment. At that time, Mr. Pabre had secretly boarded the Tai family's private spaceship and arrived at the mountainous four states of Region S2. That inconspicuous transport aircraft was already full of fuel, and the old-fashioned engine was already roaring, but the two parties in charge of the negotiations still hadn't reached an agreement. Reaching an agreement was very important, but the timing of reaching an agreement was actually even more important. Both parties knew very well what it meant for Mr. Pabre to choose the time of the new year, so the anti-government forces kept delaying it, inevitably because they wanted to use the time to exchange for benefits. In the end, it was Mr. Pabre himself who spoke from under the transport aircraft. If the anti-government forces still insisted, then he would rather take the risk of becoming a laughingstock in the political world after the matter was exposed and return to the capital directly on the spaceship. It was precisely through this small interlude that Tai Ziyuan once again confirmed that his opinion of Mr. Pabre was correct. This Mr. Pabre did indeed have the sincerity and persistence that was rarely seen in the Federation's political circles. Tai Ziyuan was very willing to see such a person become the president of the Federation. "Young master, we should be leaving." Butler Jean walked up behind him and quietly looked at his side profile, smiling slightly. He knew very well what kind of satisfaction and tiredness a young man would feel after completing such a political operation on his own for the first time. "Yeah, I can finally relax." Tai Ziyuan sighed and said, "What's my schedule for tomorrow?" Chapter 114. Does anyone know my itinerary for next day? No. Tai Ziyuan looked at Steward Jean and said with a smile, "If that's the case, where's the danger coming from?" According to the internal analysis of the Federation Investigation Bureau, under the current circumstances, the families supporting the presidential candidates should be angry enough with the young master. "It's all just speculation," Tai Ziyuan said. "In a few months' time, I'll be leaving Yue University and heading to the West Woods for military service. Don't tell me you still expect me to be surrounded by bodyguards from my family while I'm in the military camp?" On the first day of the 67th year of the constitutional calendar, the snowstorm in Linhai University town raged as usual, covering the entire large city group in snow and ice. Families celebrating the new year were happily shopping on the streets, while students who lived alone in other places were more used to hiding under the warm blankets of their apartments and playing games. However, this habit was broken by a concert this year. All the major campuses were quiet, but the comprehensive gymnasium by the Rose River in the northwest corner of the university town was bustling with noise and excitement. Su Lu brushed off the snow on his body and took a deep breath. He raised his head and looked at the huge hologram above the gymnasium. Looking at the familiar purple-haired girl's radiant face on the hologram, he couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. Back in the Donglin region, orphans like them could only stare at the Jian Shui on the TV screen and shout unrealistic slogans. Who would have thought that in this lifetime there would be a day when they could see Jian Shui with their own eyes on the Capitol ring? Jian Shui was a superstar in the Federation. Perhaps using the term superstar was a bit inappropriate because there were as many stars in the Federation as there were stars in the sky, but stars like Jian Shui were extremely rare. It should be said that this purple-haired girl, who was not yet 18 years old, had quickly occupied the hearts of all the Federation citizens from the day she appeared on Channel 23 of the Federation. Whether it was her sometimes playful and sometimes soft purple hair, her large eyes that seemed to speak or the warship commander uniform she wore in the TV series for various historical periods, she had become the favorite topic of conversation among the Federation citizens in the past few years. Whenever Su Lu thought of Jian Shuai, he also felt that this girl was a true legend. It was said that Jian Shuai's parents died when she was young, and because of a coincidence, she walked onto the Federation's television screen. At that time, she was only playing the role of an adopted orphan in a long-lived family comedy. At that time, Jian Shuai was not yet 12 years old. Her pair of watery eyes revealed the pitiful expression of a little rabbit, and that youthful and adorable face would flash a cheerful smile from time to time. In just one night, she had defeated all the Federation citizens who were born with a natural tendency to pity the weak. This long-lived family comedy ended after 6 years. Although Jian Shuai only participated in the last 1.5 years, the character she played, who was sometimes weak and sometimes strong like an adult, became the most popular character in this comedy. Channel 23 of the Federation television station very cleverly grasped the public's preferences. 1.5 months later, they released the intergalactic TV series Full Metal Rush, which had been running until today. This TV series depicted the entire course of a female Federation warship commander, from her entrance into the military academy, to her internship, and finally her participation in the war against the Empire. The scriptwriter's skill was extraordinary, successfully portraying a female lead who had the wisdom and composure of an adult, but at the same time also had the charm of a young girl. This female lead was naturally played by Jian Shuai. As soon as this TV series was released, it immediately received an unprecedented response. It successfully broke the viewership ratings record of all the Federation television stations, except for the news channel. And the little girl who dyed her hair purple became one of the Federation's leading idols. At present, the plot of this TV series had just reached the point where the Enterprise led by Colonel Jian Shuai had broken through the debris flow and was about to arrive at the Great District of Silin. If this trend continued, perhaps they would really have to film according to Jian Shuai's age until she had gone through her entire adolescence and stepped into true adulthood. The TV station chief was not in a hurry, and the audience of the Federation was not in a hurry either. They watched the birth of a legend in the history of television, and there was only joy in their hearts. A star who starred in a TV series at the age of 11.5, who became famous throughout the universe at the age of 14, and who began to bear the pressure of advertising on the Federation television station, could definitely be called a legend. What was even more legendary was the incident that happened in the 64th year of the constitutional era. The Angry Children's Rights Protection Fund, after failing to negotiate with the TV station, sued the Federation television station, as well as the department in charge of the TV station, the Radio Management Committee of the President's Office, to the court. The foundation believed that the Federation television station, as a public property, had ignored the rights of children and continuously squeezed Jian Shuai's rest and learning time. This was unacceptable. And Jian Shuai's popularity in the Federation would bring about a very bad trend, which would make the Federation government neglect the protection of children's rights. This lawsuit caused a stir in the Federation for a while, and the matter became more and more serious. It went from the court of first instance to the local circuit court, and finally to the Supreme Court. The two sides of the lawsuit were still arguing nonstop. Public opinion remained silent on this matter, because the public of the Federation could not stand firm on this matter. Those who were busy with work during the day were most used to watching the incomparably cute little girl on the holographic screen when they returned home. And their pity for Jian Shuai came from the bottom of their hearts. They did not want this little girl to be so busy filming every day that she did not have her own life. The lawsuit became more and more serious, and the Children's Rights Protection Fund, which had a strong background, kept expanding the list of defendants. The Federation television station, the satellite service provider, and even the BD Zhuang Chun viewership survey agency were all defendants in this lawsuit. In the end, the foundation even sued 2 members of the Federation who were in charge of reviewing the content of the TV station. The director of the president's office, who publicly said that Jian Shuai should be allowed to choose her own content, was naturally not spared. The climax of this dispute in the Supreme Court was in the autumn of the 64th year of the constitutional calendar, when Jian Shui'er personally appeared in court to defend herself. In the solemn court, Jian Shui'er, who was dressed in plain clothes, adorably rubbed her fluffy purple hair and said to the live broadcast camera, "I am very grateful for the efforts that the Foundation has made for me. I also understand that the Foundation is worried that the rights of minors will not be fully protected, even without any preconditions. But I just want to say that all the decisions that I have made are my own, and I like them." The three words, "I like them," seemed simple, but it expressed the attitude of the number one star of the Federation. The Children's Rights Protection Fund still did not give up. They requested that the agreement be ruled invalid on the grounds that Jian Shui'er was not yet 14 years old when she signed the contract with the Federation television station, and that there was no legal guardian signature on the agreement. At this time, the chief judge of the Federation, who was already 79 years old and had a head of white hair, glared fiercely at the lawyer representing the Foundation. He waved the thin pieces of paper in his hand and said, "In my hand is Jian Shui'er's report card for this year. All of them are A+. I also have countless materials that can prove that acting in the TV series did not affect her studies. I know the results of Jian Shui'er's IQ test, but I will not tell you." The chief judge of the Federation looked like an old child. He smiled and looked at the cameras in the court and the stunned lawyers. "I just want to say that a child like her, no matter what career she chooses in the future, will make great contributions to the Federation. But since she has chosen to fill the spiritual life of the people of the Federation, as an old man, I can only show respect." The lawyer of the Foundation raised his hand to signal for him to speak. Chief Judge Ying waved his hand in annoyance and said, "She is not yet 14 years old, so the legal documents she signed are indeed useless. But this legal document, I recognize its usefulness because she is Jian Shui'er." The long-lasting and influential lawsuit became the best news material for the Federation television station news channel, except for the Civil War. The final result of the lawsuit, especially the last sentence of the chief judge of the Federation, made Jian Shui'er's position in the hearts of the Federation citizens even higher. At that time, there was a very interesting phenomenon. The two channels with the highest ratings in the entire Federation were broadcasting Jian Shui'er. It was just that Channel 23 was broadcasting the TV series she acted in, while the news channel was broadcasting the strange lawsuit about her. The two channels relied on Jian Shui'er and kept fighting in the ring, which was considered interesting for a while. But who can say that the lawsuit was not more exciting than the TV series? Today was the release of Jian Shui'er's new song, as well as her first solo concert. Except for the ending song of the TV series, Jian Shui'er had never sung a song. Today's new song release was not in the Capital Special District, nor in the largest city in S1. Instead, it was in Linhai University City. This made the officials and people of Linhai feel extremely proud. Just by looking at the expensive transportation outside the hall, one would know that many state legislators came with their families to watch today. Sulu took out the ticket in his pocket and walked into the hall. His expression was calm, but there was a strange feeling in his heart. For the people of Donglin, the superstar of the Federation, Jian Shui'er, was definitely not as simple as an idol. After the industrial decline, the citizens of Donglin, who relied on the welfare of the Federation to barely survive, were used to seeing Jian Shui'er's face every day in their boring lives. After a long period of companionship, the people of Donglin felt that Jian Shui'er was not a distant and unreachable star, but more like their little sister next door. Day after day, she accompanied them at dinner time, their coffee time, their drunken time. Habit was a very powerful force that subtly conquered the lives of the people of Donglin. Habit was a kind of love. Perhaps it was not the kind of love between a man and a woman, but it was still love. Chapter 115. According to the symbol on the ticket, Su Lu came to a special passage. The passage was very quiet, which made him feel slightly uneasy. The beautiful lady who checked the ticket scanned the barcode of his ticket and then checked the first layer of his microchip identity. Her face showed a trace of surprise, and then she smiled and welcomed him in. This location is better than the mayor's and Councilman High's box. I wonder who he is. He must be a weirdo. He's dressed so shabbily. Who can tell he's a big shot? Sulu had been cultivating the power in his body for the past few years, so his hearing was better than the average person. Even after walking for more than 10 meters, he could still hear the discussion of the girls who checked the tickets behind him. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It was snowing and windy today, but he was still wearing that old military trench coat and holding a VIP ticket in his hand. It was indeed a bit strange. He immediately remembered that this ticket was given to him by Tai Ziyuan. When he thought about how he had somehow gotten to know the successor of a big family, his feelings became more and more complicated. Outside the best individual box above the main stage of the stadium, Sulu was stopped by the agents in black suits. They carefully checked him, and after confirming that there were no problems, they let him in. Sulu didn't feel any dissatisfaction in his heart. He knew that if he were to enter the box and stay with that kid, he would definitely be constantly checked. The only thing that puzzled him was that he clearly had that exquisite stun baton hidden in his boots. Why did the agent check his feet unintentionally miss it? Pushing open the heavy wooden door of the private room, a light floral fragrance wafted out. It wasn't cloying at all. Su Li's spirits were lifted as he looked at the large pot of 1,000-star flowers by the floor-to-ceiling window. He saw a skinny youth with a slightly pale complexion standing beside the flower tree that was about as tall as a person. That's right. Although Sulu already knew about Meng Jiyuan's family background and knew that he was one of the people standing at the top of the Federation, which had a population of tens of billions, when they met again after a few days, Sulu still subconsciously thought of Meng Jiyuan as that pitiful guy who had fainted in his arms and used indifference and calmness to hide his fondness for commoner food. I was wondering if you would come. Tai Ziyuan turned around, smiled at Sulu, and said, "This ticket is my thank you gift. If you don't accept it, I will be disappointed. Since you gave it to me, of course I will come. Also, I said through the communication device that I have liked Jian Shuier since I was young." Sulu walked over to him and raised his knife-like eyebrows. He knew very well that this young man in front of him was not an ordinary person and would not interact with him like a normal friend. This was because in front of others, the other would always naturally reveal that kind of aura. However, he tried to treat the other like a normal person because he believed that this was how friends should interact if the two of them could become true friends in the future. Tai Ziyuan was not surprised to hear Sulu answer him like this because he knew what kind of person Sulu was. The corners of his lips curled up, and he quite admired how the other was still so stubborn in front of him. He smiled and said, "Jian Shuier is younger than you. If she heard what you said, she would definitely be so sad that she would not be able to eat." Sulu walked to his side, sniffing the fragrance of the 1,000-star flowers. He looked at the empty stage not far below the floor-to-ceiling glass and suddenly thought of something. He asked hesitantly, "Do you know Jian Shuier?" Although Jian Shuier was the most popular star in the Federation, with Tai Ziyuan's status as the heir of one of the 7 great families, it should not be difficult for him to get to know her. Tai Ziyuan shook his head. "I've been transferring schools all these years since she debuted, so how could I know her? But I've seen a few of her TV shows, and she really is a very cute little girl." For him, there were no stars in the world that were worth being infatuated with. In his position, he would look at everything with an appreciative gaze, but he would never be as emotionally invested as Sulu. Perhaps this in itself was a kind of tragedy. Sulu smiled and said, "That's good. I was quite worried that I would hear the bloody and teary history of these stars from the mouths of big shots like you. You can't imagine how big of a blow it is to people like us when our idols are disillusioned. You think too much." Tai Ziyuan could hear the hidden meaning in Su Li's words. He laughed and said, "We're not crocodiles that eat people without spitting out the bones. You don't have to always think of us in the dark. Of course, I won't deny that some people like to use celebrities as a symbol of their strength. But those people don't include me." He added in his heart, "Moreover, No one would dare to use Jian Shui'er as a symbol of their strength, unless those rich young masters were really tired of living. After Butler Jean arranged the food and drinks, he bowed to the two of them and left the luxurious private room. At this time, only the two young people were left in the private room. The atmosphere of the conversation suddenly became much more relaxed, and it was more like they were back in the H1 lounge. However, the conversation did not start for long before it came to an abrupt end. This was because Su Li's eyes suddenly froze, and it was as if the wind and snow outside the gymnasium had frozen into two icicles. He did not blink and did not move as he stared blankly below the floor-to-ceiling window. The gymnasium was dark. There was only a stage, and there was only one person on the stage. A purple-haired girl under the age of 18 walked out of the darkness and bathed in the light. The music started. This luxurious private room was directly facing the large holographic screen of the gymnasium, and it was not far from the stage. It was the best position to watch the concert. There was no need for binoculars to clearly see the beautiful and cute face of the purple-haired girl on the holographic screen. The voice input alone made it, so that the room could hear the most vivid voice of Jian Shui'er. However, Su Lu still stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in a daze, looking at the distant figure on the stage. He watched as she changed into her costume, watched as she introduced her new song with some difficulty, and watched as she, who should have only existed in his imagination, appeared in front of his eyes. Far away on the horizon, but right in front of his eyes. He did not know how long he had been standing there. Who knew how many times those melodious songs had been played, but Su Li's posture did not change at all. Tai Ziyuan had long lost his patience to keep him company. He sat back down on the comfortable sofa, picked up a glass of low-alcohol wine, and sipped slowly. His gaze would occasionally glance at Jian Shui'er's face on the holographic screen outside the window, and occasionally close his eyes to listen carefully to the first sounds of this most popular celebrity of the Federation. However, most of the time, his gaze would fall thoughtfully on Su Lu, who was standing by the window. He believed that he knew very well what kind of person Su Lu was. He was calm, passionate, sincere, and upright. He was not greedy for vanity, and had an innate aversion to seeking connections with the rich and powerful. He was a fellow who was quite lucky to have caught the eye of Professor Jean. This fellow had a talent in mecha that Tai Ziyuan still could not understand, but he was exceptionally low-key. However, at this moment, as he stared at Su Li's back, Tai Ziyuan suddenly found that he could not quite see through this fellow. Why would a young man who had to work so hard to maintain his dignity and composure in front of him lose his composure like this in front of a female celebrity that only young men and women would be madly infatuated with? No, this was not losing his composure. This was a state where he was completely immersed in the performance, forgetting everything else around him. Tai Yuan's brow furrowed slightly, especially when his sharp eyes noticed that Su Li's eyes seemed to be a little bright in the reflection of the full-length window, as if they were wet. He could no longer control his surprise. He stood up and walked over to the window. Su Lu stared silently at that incomparably familiar, yet incomparably unfamiliar purple-haired girl on the stage below the window. Watching her release her charms like a goddess under the lights, he felt his entire body stiffen. His fingers resting on the full-length window were somewhat numb, and his heart was beating much faster. In the instant that Jian Shui'er had appeared on the stage, Su Lu had thought of a proverb from the Federation. When a dream becomes reality and appears before people, people will always treat this reality as a dream. At first glance, Su Lu had felt that the purple-haired girl on the stage was not real at all, that she was someone who only existed in his dreams. He felt that everything that was happening now was just a dream. He thought that his disobedient stiff body and slightly numb fingers were all because of this reason that he could not wake up. However, following the sound of the song, Su Lu woke up. He knew that he was in the luxurious box of the Capital Ring Stadium, not outside the coffee shop on Donglin's Bell Tower Street, and not at the top of an abandoned mine. As the song progressed, Su Lu gradually calmed down, but he still stared blankly at Jian Shui'er on the stage, his eyes unblinking. He didn't know how many songs she sang, or what song she sang, but he just quietly listened and quietly watched until his eyes gradually became moist. A few years ago, under the green tree in the suburbs of Hushi province's capital, he had once cried to Jian Shui'er on the hologram screen, saying that he would take her as his wife. But he knew that the tears at that time were only caused by the fatigue of the muscles in his eyes from staring at the components for a long time in the mine's operation room. But now, he really felt very sour in his heart and had the urge to cry. He finally understood why he had always liked Jian Shui'er so much. Even after escaping to S1 Linhai University town, he still did not stop loving that purple-haired girl. It turned out that it was not as simple as liking her. Outside the coffee shop on Bell Tower Street, he, Li Wei, and the group of orphans were laughing and joking as they watched her. On the street, orphans wearing tattered black clothes were laughing and shouting slogans that they wanted to see her. Above the mine, under the dusky twilight of Donglin, he and the uncle held a glass of red wine and silently watched her. To him, Jian Shui'er was not a character that only existed on the hologram screen. She was an idol that was popular throughout the Federation. More than that, she was his memories. Those monotonous but fulfilling memories of his time in Donglin. And now, he was a fugitive from the Federation. He was a completely different person. The days in Donglin could never go back. At this moment, Su Lu thought of Uncle Feng Yu, thought of Li Wei and Chang Zi, whose whereabouts were unknown, thought of the people in Hushi province. His heart was calm and incomparably sour. "What's wrong?" Tai Ziyuan walked to his side and asked with a frown. Chapter 116. The moment he saw Jian Shi, Su Li's heart, which had been heavy for the past year, gradually opened a door. He naturally thought of everything that had happened in the Donglin district and realized that he had never forgotten. That was his past. No matter whose identity the chip behind his neck was impersonating, he was still Su Lu. A smile appeared on his ordinary face, and he quietly looked at the purple-haired girl who was singing the last song. "I have to live well in the future," he said. Tai Ziyuan frowned slightly and looked at him. "I never realized that someone as honest as you actually had the potential to be a philosopher. You only saw your idol, but you actually managed to connect it with how to live. That's because people like you don't know how difficult it is to live." Su Lu smiled. His pair of thick eyebrows, which were raised like throwing knives, began to emit a youthful vigor. The cheers in the stadium were cut off by the wide floor-to-ceiling glass, reducing the frenzied atmosphere by quite a bit. Jian Shui'er, who had already returned backstage, had no intention of returning. Under the soothing accompaniment of the closing song and the soft lighting, the citizens of Linhai City began to reluctantly leave the stadium. Su Lu looked at the venue that retreated like a tide under the window. He was calm and silent. Although he didn't really see Jian Shui'er and didn't have close contact with her, he was already very satisfied. He subconsciously took a deep breath, as if he wanted to firmly engrave the memories of today in his mind, so that he could tell Uncle and Li Wei in his dreams. A faint fragrance wafted into his nostrils. It was the 1,000-star flower tree, which was as tall as a person, gently accompanying the youth. The soil in the flower tree was covered with a layer of small white stones. Right at this moment, the door to the luxurious private room opened. Ing Ziyuan placed the wine glass in his hand by the window and was about to put on his coat and leave when a trace of doubt suddenly appeared between his brows. This was because he noticed that Butler Jean, who had pushed open the door and entered, had an ugly expression on his face. This loyal subordinate who had followed his family for many years had always been calm and collected, and he rarely displayed such emotions. What happened? The staff of the Federation Investigation Bureau's Linhai Field Office Station at the Radio Management Committee found an abnormal current wave near the stadium. Butler Jean looked at Tai Ziyuan and said softly. Su Lu had already turned around, but he didn't understand what had happened. The Radio Management Committee was responsible for monitoring the television broadcast. What did the abnormal current wave have to do with people like him? Butler Jean quickly continued, "It should be some kind of heat current emitted by some large equipment, but it was hidden in the signal band of the satellite, so it wasn't easy to find." At that moment, the door of the luxury box was pushed open again, and a group of black-clad agents from the Special Task Force entered in a line with vigilant expressions. The leader of the agents said in a deep voice, "The Special Task Force has received news that there are some problems in Linhai today." After saying this, the leader of the agents, who was about 40 years old, tilted his head and listened carefully to the voice in his earpiece. He then looked up and said directly, "We must evacuate immediately." A tense atmosphere suddenly filled the entire luxury box. The agents of the Special Task Force began to contact their colleagues outside the stadium and began to file a report. Their hands were already on the holsters at their waists. The two agents at the door poked their heads out and looked around vigilantly. Sulu was shocked. He didn't expect to be involved in such an incident right after watching Jian Shue'er's concert. Then his eyebrows twitched slightly because he noticed a strange phenomenon in the room. His right hand, which was hanging by his side, slowly lowered and touched the edge of the flower tree. Hearing the leader of the agents, Tai Ziyuan, didn't move. He put his jacket on his left arm and looked at Butler Jean quietly. Last night, Butler Jean had already warned him that some forces were starting to become restless. However, he thought that in the Federation Society, which was ruled by law, those families wouldn't have the guts to carry out an assassination in broad daylight. Moreover, he had always had good security around him, and not many people knew that he was going to watch the concert today. Therefore, he followed the schedule and came. It's possible that hot start noise that we heard could be from a military mecca. Butler Jean glanced at Tai Ziyuan worriedly. This judgment immediately increased the tension in the luxury box. Federation mecca were strictly controlled by the military. If someone wanted to harm Tai Ziyuan and actually used a military mecca, it could only mean that the other party's power was unfathomable. More importantly, this was an extremely rare violent method in the strange political history of the Federation, which meant that the other party was crazy. Sulu stood silently behind Tai Ziyuan. After hearing this news, a heavy weight weighed down on his heart. He looked at Tai Ziyuan quietly, not knowing what this friend of his had done to make some people want to assassinate him at all costs. Fortunately, the Tai family's security measures were airtight, and with the cooperation of the Federation government, they were able to monitor the situation in advance. The capital had also given a clear warning. At this time, the people in the box reacted in advance and should be able to leave in time. The two agents at the door of the box held guns in both hands and walked out of the heavy door calmly with their bodies slightly lowered. They began to confirm the safety of the corridor. In the box, a few Special Task Force agents in black suits had already taken out their standard handguns from their holsters and started to push the safety pins with the thumbs of their right hands. At this moment, more than a dozen extremely shrill sounds of something breaking through the air rang out. More than a dozen hard white stones all smashed into the face of one of the agents. With a loud bang, the agent's face was covered in blood. Blood splattered everywhere. With a muffled grunt, the agent opened fire with the handgun in his hand. He opened fire at Tai Ziyuan. Bang, 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 bang. A series of rapid and crisp gunshots rang out in the luxurious box. The gunshots of the agents, which had been processed, were crisp but not loud. It was more like the sound of soybeans being fried. After the crackling sound stopped, the box returned to silence. Only the low sound of gunshots still produced a faint echo in the room. The faint smell of gunfire filled the air. The agent's body lay on the floor in a pool of blood. He had been shot at least 4 times. His face was badly mangled by the stones, and one of his eyeballs had burst open. The 40-year-old Special Task Force leader lowered the muzzle of his gun and looked around the room. He confirmed that the last shot that the agent had fired had only grazed Tai Ziyuan's body and shot into the wall. Only one of his team members had been hit in the thigh by a stray bullet. It was not fatal. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. The Special Task Force agents reacted quickly when they were suddenly attacked by a mole. They killed that person in the shortest amount of time. However, the Special Task Force leader stared blankly at the body in the pool of blood. He could not believe his eyes. He asked softly, "Balmer, this? Why?" The Special Task Force agents were all vetted countless times to confirm their absolute loyalty to the Federation and the law. Only then were they qualified to be personal bodyguards. Why this agent named Balmer shot at Tai Ziyuan, and when he was bribed to become an assassin, had become a mystery. Even if he was still alive, there was no way he could answer these questions. Under the glory of the First Charter, he had assassinated the heir of the Tai family. His fate had long been sealed. Therefore, the Special Task Force leader could not understand how his team member had become a criminal. "We need to evacuate immediately." The Special Task Force leader reported the incident in the private room to his team members through the intercom. At the same time, he changed the evacuation plan. He looked at Tai Ziyuan and said in a heavy tone, "There is a mole, and the evacuation route is no longer a secret." The Special Task Force leader reported the news of Balmer's betrayal to the Special Task Force officers as quickly as possible. Then, he raised his head and looked deeply at the young man by the window. He should have been grateful to the young man for not letting Tai Ziyuan die and not letting his team of agents become criminals of the Federation. However, his feelings were very complicated and strange. This was because the young man had discovered Balmer's problem earlier than him and the other professionals. Furthermore, he had only used a handful of stones to interfere with Balmer's shooting. Beside the floor-to-ceiling window, Su Li's chest kept rising and falling. He was still in a state of nervousness and fear. There were a few white stones scattered around his feet. He thought that if his reaction had been slightly slower, Tai Ziyuan would have been a dead man by now. From the moment the special agent named Balmer entered the private room, Su Li had noticed his abnormality. This was because this was the special agent who had checked on him outside the private room at the beginning. This special agent actually did not find the stun baton he had hidden in his boots. It was either the special agent's professionalism was extremely poor, or he had something very important on his mind at the time and missed this part of it. Special Task Force agents were responsible for protecting the president and some important political figures. How could they have such poor professionalism? However, what really made Su Li wary was this agent's reaction after he had entered the private room. When Butler Jean had mentioned that a military mecha might have already been activated in the vicinity of the gymnasium, this agent had remained as calm as the other agents. However, he appeared to be too calm, so calm that not a trace of doubt or shock could be seen in his eyes. "Uncle Feng, you had once exclaimed that Su Li had the gift of being able to read people's minds. Throughout his years as a mechanic, he had developed a pair of keen and observational eyes. In the shortest amount of time, he could notice even the slightest changes around him. Therefore, when he saw the special agents take out their pistols and start to push the safety pins, his eyes began to narrow nervously. When he noticed the special agent, named Balmer, push the safety pin with his thumb, the muzzle of the gun started to move in an extremely inconspicuous manner. When he secretly aimed it at Tai Ziyuan, he moved. Even if it was a misunderstanding, he had to move. His right hand, which was hanging by the side of the flower pot, grabbed a handful of small white stones. The burning sensation in his body and behind his waist surged and turned into a powerful, trembling force. It traveled from his skin to his palm, and he threw it out with all his might. The white stones were mixed with the mysterious power in his body. At that moment, they became as sharp as bullets. Thus, there was an additional corpse on the floor of the private room. Its eyes were split open, and its face was mangled. Chapter 117. Did you see that? My life isn't easy, either. Tai Yuan didn't look at the corpse on the ground. A person who couldn't speak wasn't worth paying attention to. He smiled as he spoke to Su Li. This sentence was obviously directed at Su Li, who said that people like him didn't know how hard it was to live. Su Li tilted his head and didn't say anything. In fact, he hadn't completely recovered from the shock of what happened earlier. Although he was the first to notice the abnormality of the agent, the gunfight in front of him made the originally spacious, luxurious private room seem extremely small. The gunshots ended too quickly, so quickly that he didn't even have time to be afraid of stray bullets. Tai Yuan didn't say anything like thank you for saving his life again. He couldn't use his own life to repay the favor of saving his life, so it was fine as long as they both kept it in mind. We should go. The middle-aged leader of the agents saw that the young master of the Tai family was still chatting with Su Lu as if nothing had happened. He couldn't help but frown and urge them again. At this time, Butler Jean, who had been on the phone all this time, walked over and said calmly, "I've already spoken to the director of the Special Task Force. You guys stay in this room for the time being and don't go out." The leader of the agent was slightly stunned, but he immediately understood the meaning of the old butler's words. There was a traitor in his team, and the Tai family no longer trusted them. At least under the current circumstances, they had no choice but to choose not to trust them. He was silent for a moment and decided that this was the only thing he could do at the moment, so he nodded. Butler Jean looked at Tai Zuan's side profile and said, "The personnel of the security team have entered this area of the stadium and are currently exchanging fire. They should be able to clear this area in 3 minutes." Since that phone call, Tai Yuan's security had been transferred from the Special Task Force to the Tai family's own security team. Since the enemy could even infiltrate the Special Task Force and possibly use mechas, then the road leading out of the stadium would definitely be filled with assassins responsible for sniping. At this moment, the members of the Tai family security team had already started exchanging fire with these people. Since Butler Jean had given them 3 minutes, he must have been very confident in his subordinates. Tai Zan listened quietly and then suddenly said, "Can you find the location of the military mecha in 3 minutes?" "No." Butler Jean watched from the corner of his eye as the Special Task Force agents began to make their way to the room beside the private room. He replied softly, "It's precisely because we can't that we need to leave as soon as possible." After a moment of silence, Tai Yuan shook his head. Looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the stadium below, he said softly, "There are over 30,000 spectators. Even if they were to evacuate urgently, it would still take more than 10 minutes. I'll be out in 3 minutes. If that military mecha had chosen to attack at that time, how many people would have died? I don't want innocent citizens to be my meat shield." When Sulu heard this, a sincere and appreciative smile appeared on his face. Tai Yuan looked at him and smiled. He calmly sat back down on the sofa and said to Butler Jean calmly, "The enemy must have taken your reaction time into consideration. If we were to leave now, they might be waiting for this moment. If that's the case, why don't we wait? After all, they should be more anxious than us." Butler Jean was silent for a long time. Then, he turned around and left. The phone in his hand was connected again. He continuously issued orders in a low voice, asking for support from the family. At this moment, his phone call represented the will of the Tai family. Every order would be carried out effectively. Every message delivered would cause an unquenchable shock within the Federation. "You surprised me." Sulu sat on the other side of the sofa. He held a glass of wine and took big gulps to suppress the anxiety and nervousness in his heart. Other than when his uncle was being hunted down by the Federal Army, he had never experienced such a big scene in his life. "You don't have to praise me. I know that I'm in a privileged class with a strong sense of morality." Tai Yuan took a sip of wine and said with a self-deprecating smile, "Actually, you surprised me more. Not to mention your reaction earlier. At least you still have the guts to stay here and drink with me. That's really something. I don't know if I'll be turned into a hornet's nest once I leave the room. Since that's the case, I might as well stay here with you. I think it's safer here." Sulu smiled bitterly and said honestly, "Actually, I'm very nervous." At this time, the members of the Tai family security team had completely taken over the work of the agents. The top floor of the stadium had been confirmed to be safe. However, there were still occasional sounds of gunfire coming from outside the VIP room. The people who were slowly leaving the stadium definitely didn't notice these sounds. However, the two young men in the VIP room knew very well that these sounds were the sounds of special guns firing nonstop. 2 minutes had already passed. The Tai family security team was gradually clearing out the path of retreat. However, no one felt relaxed. According to the reports of those team members, the people on the other side seemed to be a group of well-trained professional soldiers. Then they thought about the military mecca that had been running hot for more than 10 minutes and still hadn't found its exact location. Everyone was very nervous. Sulu was also the same. Although he had experienced some things before, such as personally witnessing a hair-raising mecha battle in the valley in the suburbs of Hushi State Capital, and even having a black gun barrel pointed at his temple several times, he was still very nervous right now. After all, he was just an ordinary young man who had lived a normal life since he was young. This kind of invisible danger was like some kind of chemical fog, making the air in the VIP room seem heavy, making it difficult for him to breathe. I'm very sorry to have dragged you into this. Tai Zuan looked at Su Lu quietly, but there was a hint of meaning in his smile. He said with a smile, "Right now, your face seems to be even paler than mine. That's because I'm hungry." Su Lu wasn't lying. Earlier, when he used that mysterious power in his body, his stomach instantly felt hungry. He ate a few snacks and drank a few glasses of wine, but his face still didn't have much of a red flush. However, he didn't know that the sight of him casually eating and drinking on the sofa was in the eyes of Tai Zuan and Butler Jean, a sign that he had a clear mind and was not afraid of external things. It seems that important people like you live a very dangerous life. Su Lu shook his head and said, "But are you really not afraid at all?" Tai Zuan was silent for a long time. He smiled and raised his left hand that had been resting on the sofa's armrest. That hand, which was as thin as a woman's, trembled slightly in the air. "Of course I'm afraid. Because I'm still young, I'm destined to do many great things in this life. I can't bear to die, so I'm afraid of death. But I can't let others know that I'm afraid." He paused for a moment, then said with a smile, "To be honest, I don't have many such incidents in my life. For me, being assassinated is a very strange experience. Not even once in the past." Su Lu asked curiously, as if he wanted to use the conversation to ease the tension in his heart. "When I was young, I hid my identity and studied in a primary school in the capital. At the time, I was in the same class as Zoyu." Tai Ziyuan's eyes suddenly became blank. He recalled, then, one day in the 6th grade of primary school, I was preparing to get on the bus when a heavy truck suddenly rushed over from the other end of the street. The truck rushed all the way over. I thought that I was going to die, but unexpectedly, the last tire of the truck suddenly burst. The truck forcibly changed direction about 10 meters in front of me and crashed into a large tree. It wasn't a traffic accident. Later, the police determined that the nature of the accident was a hit and run. The truck crashed into 4 cars on the street, including our school bus. Just looking at the scene, it did look like a car accident. Tai Ziyuan's eyes suddenly became cold. A total of 17 people died. Only 2 students from our class died. When the truck finally changed direction, it was shot by the security personnel of my family who were hiding across the school with an anti-material gun. Tai Ziyuan's brows flashed with a trace of gloom. From that day onwards, I transferred schools. Other than the occasional contact with Zoyu, I never returned to that school. I also never went to school with the normal people in the Federation again. My life has only been in danger once." Tai Yuan's expression calmed down, and he said, "Our family has only one son for 7 generations, so we have always been very careful about these things. Today is the 2nd time. The first time, my luck was not bad, so I hope that today's luck is not bad." Su Lu looked at Tai Ziyuan's slightly pale and thin face, and his heart suddenly sympathized with the other person. He felt that the other person's life yesterday was not much better than his own life as an orphan and fugitive. Thinking about that night in the H1 area, when the person in front of him who was younger than him fainted and helpless in his arms, his heart surged with the urge to protect the other person. "Don't worry, you'll be fine today," Su Lu said very seriously. "The passage is clear, there's no crowd, we can pass through." In the communication device, someone used a fast and steady voice to report. Wearing bulletproof vests and helmets, Tai Ziyuan and Su Lu walked out of the VIP room under the protection of more than 10 fully armed security personnel and walked out of the gymnasium. There were two corpses lying in the elevator reserved for VIPs. The doors of the elevator opened and closed repeatedly, repeating the same process for eternity. There was a series of hurried footsteps on the empty stairs. Sulu, who was following behind Tai Ziwan, saw the bullet marks on the wall and the blood around the corner through the glass mask. He listened to his own hurried breathing and quickly followed the group down the stairs. He wondered in his heart how many of the Tai family security personnel had died here today. The gymnasium had already been cleared by the security personnel to ensure that it was safe. The service personnel who were lucky enough to survive the gunfight were gathered in a room. When a group of people walked past the room, Sulu could not help but take a look inside. He saw the frightened expressions on the faces of the girls, and he felt slightly perplexed. The stairs led directly to the underground parking lot. The group of people opened the door and saw a black car without any logo. The back door of the black car was already open, and Butler Jean was sitting in the driver's seat. Chapter 118. Seeing this black car without any logo, security personnel wearing dark combat suits rushed out in the shortest time possible and spread out around the car. Although these bodyguards, who were obviously from the military, still maintained vigilance on their faces, the anxiety in their eyes lessened a lot. Sulu noticed that Tai Ziwan in front of him, the muscles on his back that had been tight all this time also relaxed at this moment. The danger was not over. The people present were either well-trained professionals or people like Tai Ziwan, who had a calmness that was not in line with his age. The only reason for their sudden relaxation was that black car. Sulu judged that his companions seemed to have infinite confidence in this black car. However, even if this black car was specially made and could be bulletproof, could it withstand the attack of a military mecha? A trace of confusion flashed through Su Li's mind. At the same time, his eyes passed over the black car ceiling that reflected the parking lot lights and fell on the concrete wall directly facing the door. In a luxury box, he was able to discover the mole earlier than the special task force agents because he was an outsider. Secondly, he had extremely keen eyesight and hearing. Thirdly, it was because of his experience in the past year. Since escaping from Donglin, he had been carefully observing and guarding everything around him. He was always worried that one day the police or special forces of the Federation would come and deal with him. Therefore, when he did not feel absolutely safe, he would look at everyone with a suspicious gaze, in all the unusual places. Gradually, this seemed to have become an instinct of his. His eyes fell on the concrete wall and found that it was a little wet. At the same time, he faintly heard a sizzling sound, and his heart trembled. This observation and thinking did not take long. At this moment, Tai Ziwan was under the protection of a bodyguard, using the fastest speed to get into the back of the black car. Su Li's pupils suddenly shrank, and he used his strength at will. The burning heat broke out again behind his waist, causing him to stomp his feet on the concrete floor. Like a fierce tiger, he pushed Tai Ziwan to the ground and shouted, "Be careful." His reaction was still a moment too slow. A black metal tip suddenly grew out of the slightly wet cement wall opposite the door. It hummed and rotated, and in a very short time, it pierced through the entire cement wall. It was very easy, like a knife piercing through a thin piece of paper. The cement wall couldn't withstand the force of the metal drill and instantly fell apart, scattering into countless pieces of cement and flying in all directions of the underground parking lot. A black mech about 5 meters tall slowly walked out from behind the broken cement wall. This scene was extremely shocking. It looked like a god of death had come out from the netherworld. The mech with a metallic luster was faintly discernible in the dust, as if it was going to reap the lives of everyone in the field. The black mecha's left mechanical arm was still spinning at high speed, while the right mechanical arm's Darlin's standard rotary gun began to spray bullets at the black cars and the surrounding Tai family security personnel. Darlin's rotary gun spewed out 6 brilliant blue flames, and countless metal bullets began to dance in the air. Sulu only had enough time to push Tai Ziwan to the ground. He only had enough time to shout that one word before the black mech's firepower reverberated throughout the entire underground space. The bodyguard who had been following Tai Ziyuan all this time was instantly pierced through by those high-speed bullets. He was reduced to a pile of flesh and blood that enveloped the side of the black car. The black mecha's gunshots were very strange and dull, as if countless balloons were exploding. Puff, 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 puff. It wasn't that terrifying, but the bullets dancing in the air in the underground parking lot were abnormally terrifying. The military mecha's frightening speed of firing made the bullets cover the entire area like raindrops. Loud whistling sounds, the sound of bullets piercing through the air. The sound was terrifying. The black mecha's right mechanical arm spat out endless gunfire, cutting through the air and making ear-piercing screeching sounds. The bullets carried enormous kinetic energy and lethality, and in an instant, the cement walls of the parking lot were smashed into pieces. Countless sharp cement shards fell off and flew in an irregular pattern, shooting in all directions. The Federation's technology combined with the military's killing machine, at this moment, fully displayed its infinite power. No matter how well-trained a soldier was, in front of this black mecha that walked out from the dust, they would only feel their own insignificance and endless despair. As for the elite security personnel of the Tai family, they didn't even have the time to feel despair. Within the first second after the black mecha broke through the cement walls, they were all shot into countless pieces by the black mecha's gunfire. The Tai family security personnel had already carried out full control of the underground parking lot. They also knew that in the surrounding areas of the gymnasium, there might be a mecha that had already completed its warm-up activation. However, no one would have thought that this standard military mecha had actually been hiding under the gymnasium all this time, just waiting behind that slightly wet cement wall. That cement wall was obviously newly built. It was even possible that after the other party found out about Tai Ziyuan's whereabouts, they built it overnight last night. If the Tai family had more time to react, more time to prepare, they might not have made such a mistake. If the Federation's Rapid Response Department had more time, perhaps they would have already found out where the mecha was hiding. However, there were no ifs in this world. A mecha that had wandered out of the control of the military was in itself an inconceivable matter. Who would be able to fully understand the layers and layers of inside information behind this? And the faction that planned today's operation against Tai Ziyuan was actually able to come up with such a meticulous plan in such a short amount of time. They even had the ability to secretly transport a 5-meter-tall mecha to Lin Hai and into the underground parking lot of the gymnasium right before Jian Shue'er's concert. All these signs indicated that the person who planned and executed this assassination plan was not only as crazy as Tai Ziyuan had described, but also had a kind of genius or idiotic imagination. The appearance of this standard black military mecha had undoubtedly hit the weak spot of all the countermeasures of the Tai family. The most crucial part was the timing and location of its appearance. In just 1 second, that black mecha had eliminated all the enemies. Its strength was really enough to make people despair. Only those who were still alive could feel despair, such as Su Lu, who was lying in a pool of blood from the security personnel. However, Tai Ziyuan did not seem to be in despair. Cold sweat had begun to form on his pale face, but his eyes were still fixed on the door of the black car, not far in front of him. It was as if he was certain that as long as he could enter that black car, even if the opponent was a military mecha, he would still be able to survive. In the first second of the mech's attacks, this black car had indeed displayed an inconceivable ability to withstand attacks. It was unknown what special material the body and tires of this car were made of, but under the frenzied barrage of the black mech Darren's revolver, countless deep metallic glints appeared on the body of the car. Some of the edges of the car had already been pierced through, ripping open powerlessly. However, the body of the black car did not suffer any irreversible damage. Although those extremely tragic-looking large bullet holes glowed with a pitiful metallic glow, not a single bullet hole was able to pierce through the interior of the car. In what should have been a quiet underground car park, the sound of electric current crackling and the strange sound of alloy tracks grinding against the concrete floor rang out. The atmosphere was particularly gloomy and somber. Amidst the noise, amidst the dust, amidst the bloody fog in the air, that black mecha approached the black car. On its right mechanical arm, Darren's rotating gun barrel was still wildly firing bullets, not stopping for even a moment. The black car was continuously hit by the bullets, miserably bouncing off the ground, and then falling heavily once again. The tires slid on the concrete floor. The black mecha's gunfire was like an invisible hand, pushing it in the direction of the main entrance. In front of the enormous firepower, the black car without any insignia was like a small boat in a storm. At any time, it could be overturned by those dazzling waves of gunfire, and then be torn into countless pieces, sinking to the bottom of the sea, never to rise again. And in the only angle that the black car could cover, Su Lu and Tai Ziyuan, who were in the pool of blood, could not even lift their heads under the flying metal shards and concrete. They were even more unable to retreat into the interior of the stadium, and could only wait for the metal shells to tear them into pieces. M52, it's an M52, Su Lu lay in the pool of blood, mumbling incessantly. Looking through the bottom of the black car, he saw that the mecha tracks had already entered advance mode. He anxiously and angrily discovered the model of this powerful mecha. Boundless fear made Su Li's face abnormally pale, but it also made his mind abnormally clear at this moment. The secretion of adrenaline allowed this young man to finally show that his nerves were stronger than anyone else's in this desperate situation. In this moment, he was a rock of Donglin. Under the attacks of the black mecha, a rock would also shatter like tofu, but until the moment it truly shattered, the rock would always be able to maintain a terrifying calmness, just like Su Lu at this moment. He narrowed his eyes, his entire body cold as he recalled all the blueprints of the M-type mecha in his mind. He recalled the firing speed of Garland's rotating gun barrel, recalled the loading capacity of the M52's chain magazine, and calculated the time. 4 seconds after the appearance of the black mecha, Su Lu and Tai Ziyuan were the only two living people left in the underground car park. Su Lu and Tai Ziyuan. Under the impact of this level of power, Su Lu knew very well whether or not Butler Jean in the black car had been jolted to death. He only knew that he only had time to calculate for 2 seconds. It was at this moment that his ears, which were already buzzing from the vibrations, caught a sound. That extremely soft sound was like the friction between a piece of paper and another piece of paper. The scientists of the Federation had never been able to solve the problem caused by the inherent structure of the M-series mecha, the Zero. 2-second pause when the chain magazine reloaded. Although Su Lu was a genius in mechanical engineering, he did not have the ability to solve this problem. However, he knew this problem, knew that he only had 2 seconds, and he had been preparing for this 2 seconds. Chapter 119. A pause of 2 seconds. If a human was not able to focus, they would not be able to notice it at all. Even if they did notice this pause, they would not be able to react unless this person's reflexes and the ability of the body to achieve this speed were different from the rest. Coincidentally, Su Lu was such a person who was different from the rest. In that instant, the muscle fibers in his body twisted and stretched, exploding with terrifying strength. This strength was converted into speed, and like a gray shadow, he shot up slightly from the ground, grabbed Tai Ziyuan by the back of his neck, and threw him into the car. The unique muffled sound of Darren's gun barrel rang out once more, and the dense stream of bullets slammed heavily into the already tattered body of the black car, sending it flying off the ground once more. Su Li's good luck came to an end at this moment. Tai Ziyuan had already been thrown into the back seat of the car, but because the car had suddenly shot up, his body slammed heavily into the bottom of the heavy back door of the car, unable to enter. With a muffled thud, Su Lu painfully collided with metal and fell to the ground. At the same time his body hit the ground, the four wheels of the black car that had been sent flying by the mecha's firepower also landed heavily on the ground at almost the same time. In the instant before the black car landed on the ground, its tires had already begun to spin rapidly while still in the air. Butler Jean, who had been sitting in the front row without knowing whether he was alive or dead, reacted at some point. In that split second, he made preparations to escape. Screech, screech. The tires rubbed against the ground, producing a sharp sound. Smoke rose, and there were even sparks. With a screech, the moment the black car landed, it gripped the ground in a decisive manner and shot forward. In just an instant, it had become a plume of dust that rushed towards the underground parking lot. Its speed was truly astounding. Several streaks of blood had just appeared on Su Li's face, but before they could flow down, he stared dumbfoundedly as the black car, carrying Tai Zuan, sped away, leaving him in the parking lot filled with flesh and blood and the smell of gunfire. And at this time, without the black car as a cover, he stood next to the enormous and powerful black military M52 mecha, looking very lonely and small. After Su Lu threw Tai Yuan into the car, he realized that when he was still outside the car, he didn't yell at Butler Jean, "Start the car," like those righteous protagonists in movies. Don't mind me, because he didn't have time to shout, and he didn't want to be left behind. Although he knew full well that the black car had to seize the opportunity to escape, he was certain that this was not Tai Ziyuan's intention. Instead, it was the most logical choice that Butler Jean had made. If he had been able to react in time, perhaps he would have subconsciously asked Tai Ziyuan to escape first and not bother about him. However, he still felt extremely frustrated. Everyone had either died or escaped, leaving him alone to face that black M52 mech. Sulu half-crouched on the blood-soaked concrete floor. His pupils constricted nervously as he stared at the black mech that was turning around not too far away from him. That black metallic military mecha didn't pay any attention to the unarmed young man beside it. Its target was the black car that was currently speeding away from the underground parking lot, because it knew very well that the heir of the Tai family was in that car. And in its opinion, no matter how well-trained a human was, he would not be able to pose any threat to its powerful mecha, not to mention that the human did not have any heavy weapons in his hands. And so, the black M52 mecha turned around silently. Amidst a series of static noises, the lower half of the mecha began to enter full movement mode. Meanwhile, on the right mechanical arm of the mecha, a metal barrel-like component had already protruded, aiming at the black car that was already 50 meters away and was about to reach the underground parking lot. Su Li's entire body was in intense pain. He stared in disbelief at the movements of the black mecha in front of him. In an instant, he recognized the component protruding from the mecha's right mechanical arm. It was the main cannon. Titan awkwardly squeezed into the car, but was immediately jolted up by the violent vibrations. Then he saw that Butler Jean, who had been in the driver's seat, had raised his head at some point. He was looking ahead silently, and the battle scene around the car window was instantly cast behind him. His face was pale, and he immediately noticed that Su Lu was not in the car. He abruptly turned his head, and, through the cracked rear window that was still intact, he looked back. Then, his expression became abnormally complex, because he saw a scene that he could not accept. Far away in the underground parking lot, that huge black mecha was turning around amidst the sound of static. Meanwhile, his friend Su Lu was half-kneeling in a pool of blood beside the mecha's mechanical leg. He looked like an ant that could be trampled to death at any moment. Meanwhile, behind the completely collapsed concrete wall, several fully armed killers were forcing their way through the area the mecha had opened up. A pained expression appeared on Shi Ziyuan's handsome face, and his usually calm eyes were filled with boundless anger and grief. He knew that no matter whether it was a random move from that military mecha or those mecha squad soldiers hiding behind the concrete wall, they could easily kill Su Lu. His thin lips were tightly pressed together. His hands gripped the back seat of the car so hard that his fingertips dug deep into it, but he did not say a word. Su Lu had saved his life once again, but he could only watch as his benefactor died. This was because he knew that even if he stopped the car and drove back now, he would not be able to save the other's life. Moreover, at this critical juncture, Butler Jean would definitely not listen to his orders. Tai Ziyuan's emotions were very complicated. Mecha's main cannon firing. Defense probability, 40%. The car's central control computer began to beep urgently and began to issue a stern warning. The seatbelts automatically popped out and strapped the bodies of the people in the car tightly to their seats. Like Sulu, Tai Ziyuan narrowed his eyes slightly. Through the spiderweb-like glass, he looked at the black mecha's raised right mechanical arm in the distance. He looked at the incomparably tiny Sulu beside the black mecha, as though he had not heard the warning at all. Sulu half knelt in the pool of blood. He looked at the huge mecha not far in front of him and slowly, but terrifyingly used its right mechanical arm to aim at the fleeing black car in the distance. Since he was young, he had been constantly learning about mecha mechanics. After a year of absorbing information at UA University, he could easily determine that this M52's main cannon, which had the highest output power, would hit the fleeing black car in 0.3 seconds. The black car had already demonstrated its powerful defensive capabilities in the previous attack. However, Sulu did not think that the black car would be able to survive the attack of this mecha's main cannon. Even if it was the Empire's armored mecha, under the close-range attack of an M52's main cannon, it would only end up with a hole in the middle. The black M52 mecha let out a sizzling sound. The powerful firepower prepared for the attack caused this huge and heavy mecha's body to begin to tremble slightly. Kneeling beside the mecha, Su Li's face was pale, and his body began to tremble violently. His eyes stared coldly at the M52 mecha in front of him, at the alloy hydraulic pipe that was exposed to him in attack mode. Although that black car had left him almost heartlessly, other than anger, Sulu did not have time to develop too many negative emotions. Just as he had always emphasized to Shi Qinghai, he was a person who only knew how to use his hands and not his mouth. He was a very direct person. The reason Su Lu had fallen into such a hopeless situation was because he wanted to save Tai Ziyuan. At this time, the black mecha was about to kill Tai Ziyuan. If he were to say that he had died because of Tai Ziyuan, and Tai Ziyuan had still died in the end, this would be an extremely unreconciled and infuriating matter. It was a bit of a mouthful, but in Su Li's mind, it was only a fleeting thought. Unreconciled, not worth it. A wave of stubborn viciousness quickly took over his entire body. The corpses lying in the pool of blood around him, as well as the innocent victims he had seen in the gymnasium earlier, stimulated his long-hidden bloodthirst. How could he stop the black mecha's main cannon from firing? Sula had no choice. Although he was not an ordinary person, he was not a god either. He could only stare fixedly at the hydraulic pipe behind the mecha's right mechanical leg. Then, a familiar image appeared before his eyes. It was a verdant valley, and behind a big tree was a black M52 mech. That uncle with a familiar face smashed into the tree like a cannonball, breaking the hydraulic pipe with a single punch. Oil shot out like a waterfall, and the M52, which had lost its balance, immediately toppled over. Sulu had only seen the blueprints of the mecha before the M37 series, so he did not know which aspects of the current military's most advanced M52 mecha had flaws. However, Uncle Feng Yu's ferocious figure in battle with the mecha had already given him the most profound lesson. The military mecha that was locked onto the black car's trajectory coldly ignored the ant-like Sulu. How could it have known that the ant had already reached out with its little pincers, trying to take a bite out of the elephant's leg? The posture of this black M52 mech before Su Li's eyes was too cool. It just so happened that the hydraulic pipe was exposed right in front of Su Li's eyes. The position and angle of the hydraulic pipe closest to Su Lu were all perfect. It was like a slut sticking up her butt and telling others to come and kick her. Su, who had already been blinded by viciousness and bloodthirst, was moved at this moment. His heart was itching, and there was not a part of his body that was not itching. So, his whole body trembled, his face pale, his eyes extremely bright. Like a madman, he charged out, aiming at the hydraulic pipe on the black mecha's right mechanical leg, and viciously kicked it. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.